catch her, but they might be able to slow her down enough to let the snitch get away. Holly raced forwards at irresponsible speeds, feeling the wind like she had never before done on a broom. She felt that same innate sense for it she did as when she was a raven, and she managed to dodge through the entire Hufflepuff team. Even the keeper tried to block her, and as she rolled around him Holly heard one of the sweetest sentences of her entire life. Johnson scores for Gryffindor. I don't believe it. While they were trying to block Potter, Johnson managed to put a goal through. Gryffindor leads 110-100. Lee Jordan shouted. Holly put the huge roar the crowd shouted out of her mind and focused only on the snitch. It shot over the stands and then began to weave through them. She wasn't deterred, even when it flew through the staff box. She followed the snitch through, sending loose papers flying and at least one governor ducking for cover. Then it turned sharply, but Holly was faster. She turned inside of the snitch's turn, held out her arm, and caught the tiny golden ball with one smooth motion. She landed in the center of the pitch, and the entire Gryffindor team ran forward and hugged her. The reserves joined in, and the crowd was cheering wildly. Fred and George lifted her onto their shoulders, and as Dumbledore presented Wood with the gigantic Quidditch cup, Cedric gave Holly a nod of respect. Then Wood handed the cup to her, and she lifted it high up into the air. Wood was crying, and so Holly realized was she. She waved the cup to the roar of the crowd and thought that she could have conjured a Patronus to ward off all the Dementors of Azkaban at that moment. Chapter 30, Year 3, Chapter 19. Chapter Text. Holly's excitement at winning the Quidditch Cup managed to keep her from being driven utterly mad by the stress of the exams, but only just. The weather screamed out for anyone to go and enjoy it, but all the students were cooped up in the halls of the school. Not only were they not permitted on the ground thanks to the threat of Sirius Black, they would only have been able to go and study out there in any event. Even Crabbe and Goyle could be seen cracking open textbooks and hurriedly revising, something which Holly had never even heard of before now. Percy Weasley handed out severe punishment to anyone who disturbed the scholarly quiet of the common room as he became filled with a sort of manic energy. Holly had been recruited to run mass tutoring sessions for her classmates on dueling, as rumors swept the school that Lupin's final exam would, of course, be a practical one. She ran her fellow third years through the basics of disarming, stunning, and hex deflection, and found she quite enjoyed it. All the Muggleborns in Gryffindor Tower were being quizzed for Muggle Studies revision, and even Holly was roped into the effort. Nobody dared bother Hermione thought, who seemed to be in a sort of revision trance. After the chaos of the build-up to the Quidditch final, a strange peace had descended upon the school. Slytherin and Gryffindor were both far too busy with exams to continue their rivalry, beyond pouring all their efforts into getting last-minute house points. Whilst exam grades wouldn't be sent out in time to count, particularly outstanding performances in exams often attracted large sums of house points. Holly didn't really care all that much about the House Cup. Winning the Quidditch Cup in Woods last year had meant far more to her, but she wanted to do well. It almost surprised her that she wanted not only to pass but to excel. In all her classes, but especially defense against the dark arts. Professor Lupin's praise meant more to her than any official grade, and she felt driven to impress him. Partially because he was by far their best teacher, but also because he was one of her few links to her parents. On their first day of exams, the Gryffindor third years had Transfiguration and Charms. Holly was glad Hermione had made her and Ron study so much for Transfiguration because it was a fiendishly difficult exam. Charms, on the other hand, Holly thought she'd done very well in. She had always been best at the practical bits of magic, and Charms required less theoretical knowledge than Transfiguration. It still required a mammoth amount, but Holly's talent with a wand served her better in that class. Both exams had consisted of a short answer theory test, and then a grueling series of spell demonstrations. Holly turned teapots into tortoises and a cushion to steel, among other feats of Transfiguration. She demonstrated most of the charms they'd learned that year in the Charms exam, and was amused to find that the last spell they had to cast was the Cheering Charm. Everyone had left the Transfiguration exam stressed out and worrying over the state of their tortoises, but every third year had left the Charms exam in fits of giggles. Once the charm had worn off, Holly thought that was nice of Professor Flitwick. I hope my Cheering Charm was good enough. I can't believe I missed class that day, Hermione said, as the three of them relaxed in a deserted classroom. It wasn't quite dinner time yet, and none of them felt up to entering the den of Newt students that was the Gryffindor common room at exam time yet. "Well, it certainly cheered me up after that day," Ron said. "Hermione, if you don't get an O in charms, nobody will be getting one," Holly said. "It's a pity you couldn't show McGonagall your animagus form, Holly. I'm sure that would get you an O," Hermione said. "Maybe I'll register in my last year and claim it was my Newt project for transfiguration," Holly said. The next day, Holly found herself with her biggest surprise of the exam season so far. Without Snape breathing down her neck, she thought she'd actually done quite well in her potions exam for once. It was amazing how potions had actually become interesting after Snape stopped being such a colossal ass to her, though she wished whatever had made him leave her alone had extended to her friends. Hagrid's Care of Magical Creatures exam was just as practical as everyone had thought it would be. They had to use a Niffler to search for leprechaun gold, and Holly enjoyed it far more than an exam should be enjoyed, in her opinion. She'd collected a huge pile of fake gold at the end, as had quite a few of her fellow Gryffindors. Then Holly had to face a gauntlet of grueling exams, astronomy, arithmancy, and herbology all in one day. By the end of herbology, she was dead on her feet, desperate to get some sleep. Most students had done some last-minute revision every night, but all the third-year Gryffindors collapsed into their beds right after dinner. Bright and early the next morning, all the third years gathered as one outside the room listed for the Defense Against the Dark Arts exam. Inside, they were shocked to see no desks or dark creatures, just an empty room. "I'm afraid I've had to employ a little deception for this exam. You see, we're going to be taking it outside, so if you'll all follow me," Lupin said, as he led them outside and towards what looked like a large maze. Menacing hedgerows stood what must be 8 feet tall, and a series of large wooden beams went across the top. "Your final exam for this year's defense class is rather different from your typical exam. Inside the center of that maze is a chest containing a token you need to pass. I'll be watching from above and grading you on how you do and how long you take, but anyone who escapes the maze with a token will be guaranteed an outstanding mark. If it looks like you're in trouble, I'll step in. If you need help, send up red sparks with your wand. Now, I want you to break into groups of 3, yes, you can choose who you team up with, and get into line," Professor Lupin said. The entire year level exploded into whispers. Holly was beset with requests to team up with everyone from Hannah Abbott to Thomas, but Holly merely looked at Ron and Hermione. Both of them nodded. "As if we'd go with anyone else," Mate Ron said. "Glad to have you, both of you," Holly said, and the trio stepped right into the front of the line. Nobody else had wanted to take it, but the 3 of them had braved deadly danger and traps meant to stall Voldemort together. Lupin's exam might be difficult, but it wasn't scary compared to that. "Somehow I suspected you 3 would be first in. Let's get started, shall we?" Lupin said, and Holly led her 2 friends into the maze. Their first obstacle came around the second corner, a pool of water that completely blocked their path. The depths were murky, but Holly was sure that there was something moving in there. "Grindylows, I think. Relasho will work underwater, but fighting through that many of them will take ages," Holly said. "Then we need to go around, but I'm not sure if we're allowed to destroy the hedges," Hermione said. "What about going over it? Remember that spell Flitwick taught us last term, that freezing one?" Ron said. "That's genius, Ron. Glacius," Hermione said, freezing the surface of the pond solid enough for the 3 of them to dash across. The Grindylows bashed at the ice, and broke through in places, but not fast enough to catch the trio. Then, Holly felt a faint memory of pain. An unnatural chill gripped her, and as she rounded the corner she thought for a moment Lupin had been crazy enough to include a Dementor in the exam. "Expecto Patronum!" Holly shouted. A huge silver doe charged forth from her wand, trampling the Dementor, or rather, the Boggart. Hermione stepped forward, and the Boggart changed into the White Queen from the chessboard in their first year. "Ridiculous," Hermione said, and the White Queen's sword became an inflatable pool noodle. At the sound of their laughter, the Boggart dashed back into its hiding place. That was probably the more sensible option," Holly said. "Well, at least we know you're quick on the draw with that Patronus spell, yeah?" Ron said. They made their way past several more dark creatures, running through mist whilst ignoring a Hintpunk's lantern and burning through a patch of Devil's Snare. Then they made it to the center of the maze. A large stone rotunda, covered in ivy and looking far too old for a prop Lupin had put up last week, stood in the center of a large clearing. Inside was a chest on a stone altar, and 3 figures in dark robes. Each wore a large wood and cloth animal mask, a wolf, a stag, and a rat. Holly recognized at least 2 of them by their wands. Cedric Diggory was the wolf, and Percy Weasley the stag. Normally you would face only one of us for the token, but the master of the maze thought this was a little fairer for you 3. However, if you should agree to join us against your comrades, we will grant you a token, Percy Weasley said, in his most theatrical voice. All 3 of the trio responded at once. As if. And you look like a right git in that get-up, Percy Ron said. Percy seemed to be taken aback at being recognized. Not even for a guaranteed O. Hermione said. Expelliarmus. Holly said as she capitalized on Percy's confusion. She grabbed his wand out of the air, stunned him, and then the fight was on. Ron and Hermione both sent stunning spells at the rat-masked student, who they didn't know, and Holly turned to face Cedric. Stupefy. They both said at once, and their spells collided in midair. Holly sent a blasting curse his way, and Cedric stopped it with a strong shield charm that rang like a gong. The rat-masked student disarmed Ron after battering down his weak shield charm with stunning spells, but as he focused on trying to do the same thing to Hermione, Ron charged towards him and tackled him to the ground. While they wrestled, Hermione ran over and stunned him. Holly and Cedric traded stunning spells and disarming charms in a fluid dance of charm and counter-charm, sidestep and shielding. Holly threw in a few less dangerous curses to try and break Cedric's shields, but she didn't want to hurt him over an exam. Lumos Solemn. Ron shouted, momentarily blinding Cedric. It was enough for Holly to hit him right in the chest with a stunning spell. Cedric went flying backwards, knocked clean out. It took Hermione's prodigious magical lock-picking skills to open the chest. The unlocking charm might be easy to learn, but it was very hard to master, and they saw the wooden tokens inside. They all took one, and then they rushed out of the maze as quickly as they could. All 3 of them were breathing hard once they got out of the maze on the other side, but the whole exam had taken them perhaps 10 minutes. That was not what I expected, Hermione said. That was wicked. Best exam I've ever taken, Ron said, and Holly had to agree. I can't believe you tackled that guy, Holly said. I can't believe you managed to get Percy like that, Ron said, shaking his head. Excellent work, you 3. Let me take those tokens, Lupin said, walking down a set of wooden stairs up to the beams on the top of the maze. Oh, and do head on to divination if you have it. Professor Trelawney is seeing students individually, Lupin continued. Holly beamed at the praise, and she and Ron headed off to divination. They had the bizarre sensation of heading off to an exam Hermione wasn't taking, whilst she had a free period. This would be Holly's last exam for the year, though Ron and Hermione had ancient runes and Muggle studies tomorrow. Holly and Ron were the first 2 students to arrive at the ladder to Trelawney's classroom. They looked a little awkwardly at the ladder. Ladies first, I reckon, Ron said. Wimp. You're way better than me at divination, which is why I should go first, Holly said, and climbed up into the semicircular classroom. All the tables had been stacked against the wall, save one in the center. A crystal ball sat on the otherwise unadorned table. Welcome, dear. Congratulations on your performance in the maze, Trelawney said. Did you foresee that? Holly asked, curious. Anyone with half a brain could foresee that, Miss Potter. But I also happen to have an excellent view out my window, Trelawney said, gesturing towards one of the classroom's windows. A sort of magnifying glass had been set up there, and Holly saw that there were glowing runes etched along its rim. It seemed to follow the group of Hufflepuffs attempting the maze by itself. Now, let's get to divination. I'd like you to give me a palm reading. Holly read Trelawney's palm easily enough. She didn't divine anything interesting, but she was certain now that she was making real predictions. She could feel something as she did so, a sensation like but not like her own magic. When it came time to gaze into the crystal ball, Holly saw something odd. It was a raven chasing after a rat. She repeated her prediction to Trelawney, who seemed puzzled but interested. Holly kept trying to work out why she would be chasing a rat. When she looked up, a strange expression had come over Trelawney's face. Holly felt that same sensation of something not quite like magic, but far stronger. She could focus on nothing else but Trelawney. The Dark Lord lies alone in the darkest wood. His servants lie shackled by chains of fear and foulest magic. The betrayer shall fail in his attempt to return, foiled by the betrayed. The son shall break free, and his chains will turn upon their master. He shall journey through the dark places of the world, and bring with him to his lord emissaries 3. At the stroke of midnight, what death hath delayed shall begin again, the sun will be free, and the Dark Lord shall rise once more. Trelawney said, her voice not her own. Holly could almost see something around her, threads of gold. Then Trelawney snapped out of it, and the sensation was gone. Holly blinked, her eyes wide. That, she was fairly sure, was a real prophecy. Not just a divination, not a reading of fate, not an uncertain prediction. That was something more, Holly thought. Professor. Did you just say? Holly began, but Trelawney cut her off with a yawn. My apologies, dazing off in the middle of an exam. How rude of me, Miss Potter. No problem, Professor, Holly said and climbed back down the ladder. Something was going to happen tonight, but the problem was Holly had no idea what. Chapter 31, Year 3, Chapter 20. Chapter text. Blimey, mate, what did you see? Ron asked, concerned. I'll talk to you after your exam, yeah. We'll go to the common room and find Hermione, Holly said. She was still shaking from witnessing Trelawney's prophecy. Surely Voldemort wouldn't come back tonight. Did it mean that the first step in his return would happen tonight, the sun escaping? Ron came down about 10 minutes later, looking fairly pleased with himself. He frowned when he saw Holly was just as disturbed as when he'd left. You all right, Holly? Ron asked her. No, I'm not all right. Trelawney made a prophecy, Holly said quietly as they walked towards the common room. She went into a trance and everything. Ron asked. Yeah. I'll explain it when we find Hermione and Ginny, yeah. Don't want to do it twice, she said, and Ron nodded in understanding. They walked quickly across the 7th floor to the entrance to the Gryffindor common room, and Ron gave the fat lady the password half-heartedly. The portrait swung open, and something small dashed through at surprising speed. Then, as Ron turned to see what had just gone through, he was nearly bowled over by the unmistakable form of Crookshanks. Crookshanks, no! Hermione shouted, rushing through the portrait hole. Ginny followed after her, and Holly and Ron joined the pursuit. Scabbers! Ron shouted, concerned. The two animals dashed at top speed down the grand staircase, once leaping between a pair of moving staircases that were just starting to separate. Holly and her friends rushed after them, firing off immobilizing charms to no effect. The animals were just too fast and too small. Hermione was soon puffing and out of breath, and even Holly was feeling the exertion as they chased after the animals. What had been a sprint down the grand staircase became an exhausting chase across the grounds, as the sun got lower on the horizon. Holly could see the Homping Willow in the distance and knew that they would be in serious trouble if they were caught out on the grounds at night. Ron's longer legs had let him get slightly ahead of Holly and Ginny, and Hermione was behind them. He dashed over a slight hill, disappearing out of sight for a moment. I've got him, Arch! Ron said, his shout of relief turning into a pained scream. Holly heard signs of a struggle and whipped out her wand, dashing to the top of the hill to see what was going on. She nearly dropped her wand from shock at what she saw. The Grim had Ron by the leg and was dragging him towards the Homping Willow. Ron was desperately trying to fight it off and shield Scabbers, who he had clutched in his arms, from Crookshanks. Immobilis! Holly shouted, but her aim was off, and then the huge dog had Ron almost to the willow. Crookshanks dashed forwards, nimbly dodging between the slamming branches, and pressed something near the base of the tree with his paw. The Homping Willow went still, as though Dumbledore himself had cast a bodybind on it. Holly cast another immobilizing charm, not wanting to risk a stunner near her friend's pets, but the range was too long. Then the Grim had dragged Ron beneath the willow, into the secret passage Holly had seen on the Marauder's map. Hermione and Ginny caught up to Holly and looked at her. What happened? Where's Ron? Ginny asked, worried. This huge black dog dragged him into the secret passage underneath the willow, Holly said, and then she saw it begin to move again ever so slightly. We need to go after it now. Holly said, and the three of them ran forward as fast as they could. Holly was the fastest, and she saw the little gnarled spot Crookshanks had touched. She jabbed her wand at it and sighed in relief as the willow froze completely once more. The three of them ran down into the tunnel, and Hermione looked at Holly. "Where does this tunnel come out, Holly?" "I dunno, it goes off the edge of the map, and even Fred and George have never been down here," Holly answered, holding her lit wand out. Both Ginny and Hermione had their wands out too, as they went down the tunnel as fast as their exhausted legs could carry them. "If it goes off the edge of the map, we might be outside the wards," Hermione said, and then Holly took a step forward and felt something. It was like she'd stepped out of a warm building into freezing air, a sudden and quite shocking sensation. "Why did Crookshanks chase Scabbers all the way out here?" Ginny asked. "There's something off about both of them, Crookshanks and Scabbers. I know he's part Kneasel, Hermione, but you have to admit he's fixated on Ron's rat." "Scabbers showed up on the Marauders map when none of the other pets did, too," Holly said. Hermione opened her mouth to respond, and then they saw the tunnel begin to curve up. Holly stopped her friends, and unlit her wand with a whispered "Nox." Cautiously, she advanced into what seemed like a dusty, dilapidated house. All the furniture was smashed and ripped apart like someone had trapped an angry bear inside. The setting sun's red light filtered in through the shoddy wooden walls of the house and the shuttered windows, and Holly could hear her heart racing. She saw the tracks in the dust and advanced up the stairs. Ginny and Hermione were close behind her, their wands leveled. "Holly, I think we're in the Shrieking Shack," Hermione whispered, and Holly nodded in response. "Where are all the ghosts then?" Ginny asked, her voice as quiet as Hermione's. Holly shushed them, and then she saw the open door. It swayed a little in the wind, and Holly thought something about the tracks in the dust looked off to her. There was nothing for it though, even if that was the Grim in there and not just a dog, it had Holly's friend. She charged right through the door, kicking it open. Ron lay on the floor, his bleeding leg bandaged. Ron couldn't have done that, Holly thought. She saw Scabbers lying frozen by an immobilizing spell on the other side of the room. He looked up at her and shouted a warning, but it would have been too late. She was already moving though, and she, Ron, and the man hiding behind the door all shouted at the same time. "Holly, it's a trap. He's an animagus. Expelliarmus. Protego." Holly's shield charm sent the bolt of blue light flying into the wall, kicking up dust and sending splinters flying. It blocked another disarming charm, and then Sirius Black stepped clearly into view. He had Ron's wand in his hand, and he looked nothing like he had in Gryffindor Tower. His face held a terrible rage, and he slashed his wand at Hermione and Ginny as they entered the room after Holly. "Protego!" Ginny shouted. Hermione was too slow to react and would have been disarmed if Ginny's spell hadn't protected them both. "Stupefy!" Holly shouted, but Black deflected her spell with casual ease. Again he'd cast only clearly incanted disarming spells when he could cast a nonverbal shield charm with ease. Something clicked in Holly's mind as she thought the situation through. "You're not going to hurt Holly," Ginny said, her wand almost seeming to glow. "If you want to kill her, you'll have to fight all of us," Hermione yelled. Ron charged forward, despite his injured leg, trying to tackle Black. Still dressed in his prison uniform, the gaunt man simply stepped to the side and sent Ron tumbling backwards with an nonverbal knockback jinx. He snapped his fingers, and ropes bound Ron tightly. "I don't think you want to kill me at all," Holly said slowly, lowering her wand. She really hoped that this worked because she knew she couldn't out-yell Black if he was out to kill her. That night in Gryffindor Tower had shown how skilled Black was, even when he limited himself to stunners and disarming charms. "Finally worked that out, have you?" "I haven't so much as hexed anyone all year, and the Ministry thinks I'm here to kill my goddaughter." "You know you look so much like them," Sirius Black said, his voice soft despite Black's raspiness. What? Goddaughter?" Holly said, thoroughly confused. She thought Black might have some plan, or maybe he'd regretted being a Death Eater, but why would her parents make Voldemort's second-in-command her godfather? "Well, I suppose you're down as my godson in the paperwork." "You mean you don't know? All this time the Ministry has thought I was after you, and nobody told you why I was in Azkaban?" Black said, sounding confused himself. Hermione and Ginny were still pointing their wands at him, but they looked as confused as everyone else. You killed 13 people with one curse. I guess I assumed that was enough, Holly said. Then if your friends would lower their wands, I'll tell you the real story of what happened the night your parents died, Black said, lowering his own wand. Holly, Hermione said, but Holly gently put her hand on Hermione's and lowered her wand. It's okay. Black's had plenty of chances to kill me all year, and he hasn't taken any of them. I think we're safe enough, for now, Holly said. I was friends with your father in school, Holly. There were 4 of us, James, me, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, Black explained, but Holly interrupted him. As in our defense professor. I knew he was friends with my parents, but he didn't tell me about you or Pettigrew, Holly said. Well, I imagine it's a tough thing for Remus to talk about. We were all so close, and the 2 of us, well, it can't have been easy to be the last Marauder, Sirius said, and Holly blinked. As in the Marauders map, she asked. You have that old thing. Your father would be proud. Yes, we made the map. We were right cocky little shits, but we did do a little bit of clever magic in our day. Like becoming animagi in our school days. Your father was a stag, you've already seen Padfoot, and Peter was a rat. In more ways than one, Sirius said, walking forward and picking Scabbers up. Why does Scabbers alone out of all the pets in the castle show up on the map? Holly asked, quietly. She wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Because he can carve a name change for himself in our little patch of the Hogwarts Wardstones, but he was always the worst of us at runes. No way you'd want to try messing with the wards themselves, would you? Sirius said to Scabbers. The Wardstones. Of course, someone would have noticed the sort of tracking charms you'd need for the map unless they were already there, Hermione said. You're a smart one, Hermione. I'm glad Holly has friends with at least a little common sense, but getting back to your friend's rat. How long has he been in your family, Ronald? Sirius said. 12 years. Ron said, very confused at how Scabbers could be doing magic. Awfully long-lived for a common garden rat, wouldn't you say? And this missing toe, Sirius said. All they found of Pettigrew was a finger, Holly said, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would Peter Pettigrew need to hide, she wondered. During the war, when things were getting really bad, your parents went into hiding, Holly. Your mother cast a charm to hide you and your parents from Voldemort. The Fidelis charm kept them so secret that Voldemort could have been looking through your living room window and not seen them, but it had one weakness. Someone had to be the secret keeper, someone who could reveal the secret, but only by their own free will. They told everyone in the Or, on our side it was me, and that was the plan at first. Only I got too clever, and I got them killed for it, Sirius said, and Holly felt empty. She remembered Draco's taunting, and she realized then that he'd known. We thought there was someone spying for Voldemort, so I suggested a little trick. We'd say I was the secret keeper, but instead they'd make Peter Pettigrew the secret keeper. No one would ever expect it, and all the attention from the other side would be focused on me. Only, Sirius continued, trialing off. Only Pettigrew was the traitor, Holly said, finishing the sentence for Sirius. He nodded slowly. The night your parents died, I was so angry I wasn't thinking straight. I tracked down Peter and held him at one point in front of a dozen muggles. He killed them all with one spell, and then he chopped his own finger off and escaped, Sirius said, only to be interrupted by someone entering the room. Professor Lupin raced through the doorway, his wand lit and out, and he looked towards Sirius, and towards the rat he was holding. You got complacent, Padfoot. I saw you skulking around these 4 from my office window, Lupin said, his wand still pointed at Sirius. Please, Professor, he's innocent, Holly began, but Lupin cut her off. I can see that, Holly. You switched, you stupid bastard, Lupin said, but his voice lacked any trace of anger. I got too clever, Remus. I'm sorry, Sirius said, but he was cut off as Lupin lowered his wand and crossed the room to kiss him. Holly looked away, blushing. That was rather more intimate a kiss than she wanted to see a teacher give anyone. It wasn't you, Sirius, and that's enough, Lupin said. What are you going to do now? Holly asked when she could look at the 2 of them again. Well, seeing as how I've spent 12 years in Azkaban for it, I rather thought I'd kill Peter. Not as a rat, though, Sirius said, dropping Scabbers to the floor. He waved his wand towards him, and then there was a short, balding man in a cheap, stained set of robes. His skin looks loose, and Holly thought that his teeth looked a little rat-like. Peter Pettigrew was alive, and he was sitting on the floor of the Shrieking Shack, looking up at his former friends in utter terror. Chapter 32, Year 3, Chapter 21. Chapter text. Sirius, Remus, please. Pettigrew said, getting to his knees. The immobilizing charm had failed after he'd been transformed back into a human, and Pettigrew desperately looked around for someone who might help him. "Why hello," Peter Lupin said, his voice sounding almost pleasant. His wand was pointed directly at Pettigrew, the tip still lit up. "Remus, please. You can't believe him, he tried to kill me," Pettigrew said. "We all know you were the secret keeper, Peter. Why hide if you weren't?" Lupin said. "I was afraid of Sirius escaping, of you-know-who's other followers." "Oh, I don't doubt that you were afraid of Voldemort's followers. Not very popular with them, for some reason. They seem to think that you betrayed their lord," Sirius said. Pettigrew gave off a pathetic keening noise, turning away from Remus and towards Ron. "Please, you can't let them kill me. I was a good rat, wasn't I?" Pettigrew said, but Ron only looked at him disgustedly. "I let you sleep on my bed. Get away from me," Ron said, kicking at Pettigrew with his one good leg. "Enough of this. We'll do it together," Remus Sirius said, and he lowered his wand until it pointed at Pettigrew's chest. "No, Holly, you wouldn't let them kill me." "Your parents wouldn't want them to kill me," Pettigrew said, tears in his eyes as he grabbed desperately at Holly's robes. She looked at him, and he couldn't meet her gaze. His hands dropped to his sides, and he started to sob. Holly wanted to kill him. She wanted to see him suffer, to endure something for all the pain he had caused her. Peter Pettigrew was the reason she had grown up with the Dursleys. He'd betrayed her parents to Voldemort. Hermione and Ron looked away. Ginny just stared straight at Pettigrew, her face full of anger. Holly looked at Peter Pettigrew, and she saw a coward. But he was on his knees, without a wand, and no real threat to anyone. "Please, Sirius. This is wrong," Holly said, and it hurt to speak. To save Pettigrew's life. She remembered Kirill screaming, as she put her hands on his face. How his skin had melted away beneath her hands. He killed 12 innocent people. He betrayed James and Lily, he betrayed your parents to Voldemort. He deserves to die. Sirius shouted, and Holly couldn't disagree. If anyone deserved to die, it was Peter Pettigrew. But this, some small part of her stubbornly whispered, was wrong. "Maybe he does. But I don't think my parents would have wanted you to become a murderer for them, Sirius, and this would be murder," Holly said. I suppose you're the only one who has a right to decide, Holly. But think about what he did," Sirius said, lowering his wand. "Holly. Thank you, it's more than I," Pettigrew began, but Holly had long since stopped looking at him. "We'll take him up to the castle, and he can rot in Azkaban for all I care," Holly said, and Lupin nodded slowly. "If you're sure," Lupin said, and stunned Pettigrew with casual, non-verbal ease. He fell bonelessly to the floor, landing with a soft thump. "Now what?" Ginny asked. "We take Pettigrew up to the castle. I'm sure the headmaster will be very interested in seeing him," Lupin said. Sirius handed Ron back his wand, after conjuring a splint for his leg and healing the cuts. "Surface damage only is about the limits of my talents." "Let me help you up," Sirius said, and he put one of Ron's arms around his shoulder as everybody headed back into the passageway. Lupin cast a spell to lift Pettigrew's unconscious body into the air, and he floated Pettigrew in front of the group. Sirius and Holly walked a little behind the group, without either of them having to say anything. They both knew that they had things to say to one another. "You know, turning Pettigrew in like this, I told you about being your godfather. If you wanted to stay with your aunt and uncle, I'd understand, but if you wanted to stay somewhere else," Sirius said, quietly. "I'd leave the Dursleys in a heartbeat, Sirius. There are reasons why I need to stay there for a bit in the summer, Dumbledore can explain, but, yeah, I'd love to," Holly said, and she saw Sirius smile for the first time. It was a huge, warm smile, the kind she imagined he'd had before the war. That's "That's good," Sirius said. "Have you taken your potion, Professor?" Hermione said quietly, but Holly just about managed to overhear it. "Snape delivered it to me just before I left, but we should still have some time until Moonrise," Lupin said, nodding, and Holly wondered what all that was about. Why would Lupin need to worry about? And then, quite suddenly, it hit her. Snape's essay, his regular sickness. Professor Lupin was a werewolf. She'd read a bit about Wolfsbane potion for Snape's essay, and if Hermione wasn't concerned it was likely fine, but still, it was shocking. They exited the tunnel, Lupin freezing the Homping Willow, and started to walk towards the grounds. The sun was still setting, slowly slipping below the horizon. A bitterly cold wind blew across the grounds, and Holly shivered. "Sirius, take my wand." "It's late enough that I better," Lupin began, only to be hit with a jet of red light and crumple to the ground. Pettigrew dropped as well, and Holly drew her wand lightning fast. She couldn't see who had cast the spell, nor had she heard an incantation. Sirius rushed towards Lupin, but another jet of red light struck him. Ron dropped to the ground as Sirius dashed for the wand, and only barely managed not to hurt himself. Snape seemed to step out of the darkness, the disillusionment charm fading slowly around him. His robes billowed in the wind, and his face bore a cruel smirk. "Well well, what have we here? You four are lucky I arrived as soon as I did, Sirius Black and a werewolf, you're lucky you weren't killed." "And that I thought to follow Lupin's rather suspicious movements this evening," Snape said. "He's innocent," Professor Hermione said. "Peter Pettigrew's right there," Ginny said. "He was the one working for Voldemort, not Sirius," Holly said, stepping in front of her godfather. Snape paused for a moment, and for the first time in months, he looked at Holly. "I doubt that very much, Miss Potter," Snape said, and the look he gave her was strange. Still, he bent down to examine the unconscious Pettigrew. Snape rolled up the sleeve of Pettigrew's dirty robe and looked for something on his arm. Holly couldn't see what it was, but she saw Snape's eyes go wide. Then Pettigrew's eyes opened in a flash, and he kicked Snape hard between the legs. Shocked and in pain, Snape was unable to stop Pettigrew from grabbing his wand. "Expulso!" Pettigrew snarled, and a blast of blue light sent Snape flying backwards. He landed with a sicking crushing noise in the dirt, his arm clearly broken. "Expelliarmus!" Holly shouted, casting the fastest spell she could. Pettigrew deflected it, and he stood, grinning. "All alone now, freak." "The Dark Lord will reward me greatly when I bring you to him," Pettigrew said, all of his sniveling gone. "She's not alone," Ginny said, pointing her wand at Pettigrew. "We're not going to let you hurt her," Ron shouted, standing despite the pain. Hermione's eyes were wide, and her hand was shaking, but she kept her wand pointed at Pettigrew all the same. "Such loyal friends, I'll spare their lives if you come willingly," Potter Pettigrew said. "Fumina!" Holly shouted, and she slashed her wand at him. A crackling whip of lightning slammed into Pettigrew's shield charm, and he took a step back. "Stupefy!" Ginny shouted, as did Ron and Hermione. Their stunning spell slammed into Pettigrew's shield charm, and Holly saw it crack. Pettigrew cast a blasting curse at Holly, but she deflected it with a shield of her own. A reflected stunner caught Ron, and he was blasted off his feet by the force of it. "Expulso! Confringo! Bombarda!" Holly shouted, firing curse after curse at Pettigrew. He was surprisingly fast, and his shield charm was strong. "Reducto!" Hermione shouted, and Pettigrew's shield charm cracked ever so slightly. He whirled around at her and jabbed his wand at her. She was blasted backwards, only her powerful shield charm keeping her from broken bones or worse. Her wand went flying, the sheer force of the spell flinging it from her grip. "Defindo! Reducto!" Holly shouted, and Pettigrew had to turn to face her once more. He stepped backwards, and Ginny had to shield herself from a deflected cutting charm. She was firing curses at Pettigrew too, and fending off the both of them was slowly pushing Pettigrew back. "Oh, you can duel, Potter. Just like your father, you even share a weakness for redheads." "Crucio!" Pettigrew shouted, and Ginny screamed. It was brief, less than a second of exposure, but Ginny sank to her knees from the pain. Holly roared in anger, and she felt something. Something less than thought, and more than instinct. Her mouth incanted words she did not know, words in the tongue of serpents. She slashed her wand at Pettigrew, and that same whip of black lighting Riddle had tried to use on her in the chamber slashed straight through Pettigrew's shield and his wand arm. The wound was blackened and rotting, and Pettigrew's wand arm turned to ash before it hit the ground. Snape's wand landed on the ground, and Pettigrew stared at her, his eyes wide. Holly started at her own wand in horror. She didn't know that spell. She'd never even so much as read about it, and yet she had cast it. Cast one of Riddle's spells. One of Voldemort's. Pettigrew came to his senses first and transformed back into his animagus form. Holly snapped out of her growing horror for the moment and tried to hit him with a stunner, but, as a rat, Pettigrew was too fast to hit. The dim red light of the fading sunset made it hard to see him, and Holly thought he was going to get away, and then she remembered her divination exam. She ran after him and transformed, her wings beating with tremendous speed as she chased him. He evaded her once, and then again, and soon they were at the edge of the forest. Then Holly closed with him, and Pettigrew had time only to let out a terrified squeak before she picked him up with her talons and threw him against a tree. He transformed back before he hit, and as he did so did Holly. She landed nimbly on her feet as Pettigrew tried to scramble away from her, only for him to trip and fall as he tried to get up. He stared up at her in fear, and Holly raised her wand. She felt the incantation to another spell almost form on her lips, but she let it go. She bound Pettigrew in conjured ropes to the tree, and aimed her wand at him. "You made a mistake, hurting my friends," Holly said. "And you made one showing me your form. An unregistered animagus and a dark wizard. Let me go and the ministry need never know," Pettigrew said, his eyes fearful. "Need never know what?" Holly asked, and before Pettigrew could answer, she cast her spell. "Obliviate," she shouted, and Pettigrew's eyes had only a moment to widen in fear. They rolled back as the grey light washed over him, and Holly concentrated on the memories of her animagus form. She felt her spell touch them, and she felt them disappear. She stunned Pettigrew and hit him with a bodybind for good measure. The wind somehow got even colder and blew with tremendous force. Holly looked at her frosting breath in alarm. She heard distant shouting, and she turned to look. She could see, in the very last rays of the setting sun, dozens of cloaked figures silhouetted against the sky. They rushed over her head, ignoring her to focus on their prize. She still felt their touch, felt her memories of the chamber, but she was able to retain enough of herself to transform. Then, as soon as she became a raven, the crushing aura of despair was gone. She yelled out a caw of triumph and flew with all her speed towards her friends. The chill wind that had come with Dementor bent to her will, the instinctual magic of her form allowing her to fly faster than her wings should have allowed. Holly hoped desperately that she wasn't too late, and as she crested the last hill she felt her heart leap in triumph. Hermione and Ginny had clearly woken up Ron, and the three of them were keeping the Dementors at bay with shields of silvery mist. Even as Holly flew towards them, she saw an otter formed of silvery light emerge from Hermione's wand. She landed in the midst of the group and transformed back into herself. She felt the Dementors begin to affect her, muted by the incorporeal Paternooses, but before they could get a real grip in her mind she thrust her wand forward. "Expecto Patronum," she shouted, and a huge silver doe charged forth from her wand. It bodily slammed aside several Dementors, and Holly felt their grip on her fade completely. There were dozens of them, and more seemed to be arriving every minute. "Holly!" Ginny shouted, and then from her wand emerged a silvery horse that joined Holly's doe and Hermione's otter in fighting off the Dementors. "Reneverate! Reneverate!" Ron said, reviving Lupin and Sirius. His own incorporeal Patronus faded, but he quickly cast it again. "Nice timing, mate," he said, as Sirius and Lupin woke. "Did you get Pettigrew?" Hermione asked. "He's not going anywhere," Holly said. "What, expecto patronum?" Lupin shouted, his own silvery wolf joining the defense. As Lupin shouted that, Snape staggered to his feet. He looked at Sirius, and then at the Dementors. Snape grabbed his wand, and turned his back on Sirius to face the castle. "Potter is surrounded by Dementors on the grounds," Snape shouted, and then from his wand shot a Patronus very much like Holly's own. A silvery doe raced out of his wand and through the air towards the castle. Holly looked at him in shock. Lupin looked at the sky and threw Sirius his wand. Sirius looked at Snape's back for a moment before he summoned his own Patronus, a dog just like his animagus form. "That's a hell of a Patronus, Holly!" Sirius shouted, but even with so many corporeal Patronuses, there were just too many Dementus. Holly saw the silvery animals be pushed slowly back, saw more and more of the Dementus swarm around them. They were being overwhelmed. Then, in a flash of bright orange flame and phoenix song, Albus Dumbledore arrived. He waved his wand in the circular movement of the Patronus charm, and a great phoenix shot forth from it. A great wave of silver fire seemed to follow it, and the Dementus wailed as one. They could not face such a thing, and all of the guardian spirits Holly and her friends had conjured joined Dumbledore's silvery phoenix in driving away the Dementus. Next to Dumbledore, Holly saw something she hadn't expected: Peter Pettigrew, still stunned but no longer bound. "You got my message," Headmaster Snape said. In a manner of speaking, Dumbledore said, and he gave Hermione a very odd look. Her eyes went wide, and Holly wanted desperately to know what that was about. "Let us get out of the cold, and see that your wounds are attended to. I believe I owe Sirius here a long overdue conversation," Dumbledore said, and he led them all, and a floating, unconscious Pettigrew, back towards the castle. Lupin did not join them, instead walking back into the secret passage beneath the Homping Willow. Chapter 33, Year 3, Chapter 22. Chapter Text. Dumbledore led all of them back to the castle, Sirius and Snape glaring at one another the whole time. Dumbledore had conjured a pair of crutches for Ron, and nobody said very much as they walked across the dark grounds. Holly felt bone-deep exhaustion, and she was very glad that she didn't have an exam tomorrow as Ron and Hermione did. The huge wooden double doors to the entrance hall swung open as they approached, the castle simply opening the way for the headmaster without any magic on his part. The four black uniformed hit wizards standing guard, with their distinctive striped caps and short cloaks, stepped back in shock as they saw the group enter the school. They all drew their wands, but none of them seemed all too eager to get into a fight with Dumbledore, and the oldest amongst them looked nervously at Sirius before he spoke. "Headmaster, that is to say," he said, lowering his wand as he spoke. "Suffice it to say that new evidence about Mr. Black has come to light," Dumbledore said, pausing to step aside and gesture at the floating, unconscious Peter Pettigrew. "Do fetch the Minister, and Madam Bones for good measure, for me, Mr. Robbins," Dumbledore said. The hit wizard gave the headmaster a sharp salute and called a broom to his hand as he raced out onto the grounds. Two of the hit wizards accompanied them to the hospital wing, standing guard just outside of it. "Just what have you four gotten yourselves into this time, Merlin's beard?" "It's Sirius Black," Madame Pomfrey said, and then she saw Pettigrew. Is that Peter Pettigrew?" she asked as her eyes widened with shock. "I believe it is, Poppy. As you can see, he is somewhat worse for wear but very much alive. Best to keep him restrained for now, I think," Dumbledore said, and he levitated Pettigrew onto a bed. Holly sat down on one herself, as did her friends. Snape stayed standing, though Holly could tell he was still in quite some pain. Sirius sat down in a chair Dumbledore conjured, and gave Holly a small smile. "Merlin, what happened to him? This curse, what did Black do to him?" Pomfrey said as she cast several spells over the ruin of Pettigrew's wand arm. She began to look increasingly concerned and turned to Snape. "I'll need your help with this, Severus. We'll need to amputate the rest of the arm to stop the curse from killing him, and even then," Pomfrey said, and Holly felt sick. Snape joined Madame Pomfrey by Pettigrew's bed and closed the curtains behind him. Dumbledore looked at Holly and then turned to her friends. "Miss Granger, I believe you have a message to deliver. 2 turns ought to be enough. Mr. Weasley, Miss Weasley, would you mind terribly if I took Miss Potter for a short walk?" That's okay," Professor Ginny said, leaning tiredly against Ron. Hermione followed Holly and Dumbledore out of the hostel wing and into the halls of the castle, then she turned to Holly. "I need to go, to go make sure the headmaster arrives in time." "I promise, I'll explain everything afterwards," Hermione said, hugging Holly. "Good luck," Holly said simply, and then Hermione dashed around the corner and vanished out of sight. Holly was alone with Dumbledore, and could not meet his gaze. I didn't mean to," she said, not looking at Dumbledore. She stared out through a window, blinking back tears. I did not think you did, Dumbledore said, his voice warm and comforting. Rain began to fall from the thick grey clouds overhead. It pattered against the glass of the window, and Holly shivered a little. It felt like when I used Parseltongue to open the chamber. I just knew how to do it, somehow, Holly said. I had hoped that was the extent of the powers Voldemort left to you when he failed to kill you, but this was not unexpected, Holly. Powerful, deep magic like the magic used that Halloween night always leaves traces deeper than simple scars, Dumbledore said, his words echoed by a flash of lightning and a crack of thunder. I don't want to become dark, like him, Holly said, quietly. If the events of tonight have demonstrated anything, Holly, it is your compassion. Many good men and women would not have spoken up to save Peter Pettigrew's life. To do so required bravery of a kind far more important than mere willingness to face danger, Dumbledore said. I didn't mean to hit his arm, Holly said, her voice barely audible above the howling of the wind. You were defending your friends against a murderous dark wizard. I will not judge you, a girl of 13, for doing whatever you could to try to stop him. But it is good that he was captured alive. Sirius Black will go free, and a long injustice will finally be corrected. Professor, there's something else. During my divination exam, I think Professor Trelawney gave a real prophecy, Holly said. Remarkable, a third true prophecy from one seer. I shall have to give her a raise. Do you remember the exact words? Dumbledore asked, and Holly recited it, word for word. So that's it, Professor. Does that mean Voldemort's coming back? Holly asked. Most certainly, but that is something I have suspected for quite some time. I had hoped to give you more time, to see you a grown witch, with a happy childhood behind her, before such a thing happened. I see now that we have run out of time. Professor, Holly said, unsure what he meant. There are things you must know, Holly, things I would not burden a child with, if I had any other choice. Things you must learn if we are to be prepared. When you return to Hogwarts, we will begin, Dumbledore said, and Holly finally looked away from the window. Distant lightning flashed, and she slowly nodded as the sound of thunder reached them. Madame Pomfrey fixed Holly and her friends up fairly quickly, mending bruised ribs and broken legs with mere taps of her wand. Peter Pettigrew was still lying stunned on a hospital bed, the stump of his wand arm covered in bandages. About an hour later, the door of the hospital wing swung open to reveal two people. Holly recognized the minister, Cornelius Fudge, but not the witch walking slightly behind him. She was an older woman, her brown hair streaked with grey, but with a strength to her that the long middle age of a witch hadn't sapped from her. Madame Bones had none of the minister's flab, and her black robes, while finely cut, lacked any of his ostentatious flair. What's all this nonsense about Sirius Black being innocent? Fudge said as he entered the hospital wing, but he stopped as he saw both Black and Pettigrew. My word, you have some explaining to do, Dumbledore. Of course, Cornelius. The tale is rather long, so perhaps you would like to take a seat. Dumbledore said, conjuring two more armchairs. Dumbledore, with help from Sirius, went on to explain all about the switched secret keepers and Pettigrew framing Black. Well, I admit it's rather hard to deny that there's more to the story seeing Pettigrew in the flesh. And all this business about switched secret keepers is plausible. You're willing to take Veritaserum, Black? Fudge said. I have nothing to hide, Minister Sirius said. You must see that this places me in an awkward position, Dumbledore. The last son of one of the Sacred 28 tossed in Azkaban without a trial, Fudge said, almost pleadingly. What did you do at the ministry when Sirius was arrested, Minister? Holly asked. I was, heading up the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes at the time, Fudge said, looking a little confused. And you, Madame Bones? Holly asked. I was still an Auror then, Miss Potter. So neither of you had anything to do with Sirius not getting a trial. Who was behind that, anyway? Holly asked. Barty Crouch Sr. Sirius said bitterly. So wouldn't you acting to correct an injustice here be a good look, Minister? I'm sure you're eager to be known for your fairness, Holly said. Miss Potter makes a good point, Cornelius. I'm sure the public would approve of a long-standing injustice being corrected, Dumbledore said. You make a good point, the both of you. There will have to be an inquiry into how all this happened, Crouch, Well, in any case, we best get Pettigrew to the ministry. Black, well, as you were never sentenced to Azkaban, you haven't actually committed a crime by escaping from it. I imagine you'll have to pay a fine for being an unregistered animagus, but you're a free man. Still, it would be for the best if you came with us too, get everything down on the record, you know, Fudge said. Anything to put the rat where he belongs. Holly, I'll see you soon, Sirius said, and he hugged her. She hugged him back and smiled widely. Once again, we are all in your debt, Miss Potter, you and your friends. We really must have that lunch sometime. Well, good evening to you all, Fudge said, and then he and Madam Bones left with Sirius, an unconscious Pettigrew, and the hit wizards. Hermione took Ron, Holly, and Ginny aside the next day after they'd all been released from the hospital wing. Ron and Hermione had just finished their exams, and the four of them were enjoying a stress-free afternoon sitting outside in the sun. I promised to explain what Dumbledore asked me to do last night, so here it is, Hermione said, as she took a small golden necklace out from under her shirt. It seemed to have a kind of hourglass pendant. This is the time turner I've been using to attend all my classes, Hermione continued. Wicked, Ginny said. Whoa. I didn't know they let students use those, Ron said. Holly just felt confused. Sorry, what's a time turner? Holly asked. It lets you travel backwards in time. Only the ministry has them, and they're really strict about giving them out, Ron said. It's a little more complicated than that, but yes. I went back 2 hours and told Dumbledore about everything, that was how he got there so fast, Hermione said. The school was awash with rumors about what had happened the previous night, and then at breakfast 2 days later Holly saw that the story had finally broken. She picked up Hermione's copy of the Daily Prophet and began to read. Sirius Black innocent. Pettigrew really Death Eater, sentenced to life in Azkaban. Today, in courtroom 12 at the Ministry of Magic, one of the most dramatic trials in recent memory took place. Peter Pettigrew, thought to have been killed by Sirius Black, was found guilty of 12 counts of murder, 2 counts of accessory to murder, 1 count of accessory to attempted murder, and 1 count of membership of a prescribed group. He was interrogated by means of Veritaserum and the Sheaf Warlock's Legilimency, as was Mr. Black. After a unanimous verdict, Pettigrew was sentenced to life in Azkaban. Many members of the Wizengamot pushed for the Dementor's Kiss to be enacted, but, at the request of Mr. Black, the sentence was commuted to life in Azkaban. Minister for Magic Cornelius Fudge has announced an inquiry into how Mr. Black, the last son of a prominent pureblood house, was subject to such an injustice. Barty Crouch, head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, will be called to testify. Rumors have reached this reporter that he may be facing criminal charges for his illegal confinement of Black. For the thrilling story of how Holly Potter captured Pettigrew, see page 3. Rita Skeeter. Not a word of apology for their part in whipping up hysteria about Sirius, of course, Hermione said. Well, that's 'cause they're not sorry about it, Ron said, and went back to reading the sports section. The Chudley Cannons had managed the rare feat of drawing a Quidditch match, breaking their 17-game losing streak. You know, it's the Quidditch World Cup this summer, Dad can always get tickets from work for international games, you two should come see it with us, Ron said. I'd love to, Ron, Holly said, smiling broadly. Chapter 34, Year 3, Chapter 23. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Is it true you're not coming back next year, Professor? Holly asked Lupin the next day, after their last class. Lupin had handed out little cards with their exam results, and overall marks, along with specific feedback. Holly, Ron, and Hermione had all gotten outstanding on the final exam, with a little note from Lupin on all of their cards that they had done well enough to deserve it even without the token. It is. Teaching here has been a privilege, and I will be forever grateful to Dumbledore for giving me the chance, but there are things I need to do. Quite aside from looking after Sirius, and he will need looking after for a while, despite what he might say, Dumbledore has asked to do a few things that would keep me too busy to teach, Lupin said, putting away his things. I guess that makes sense. We're all going to miss you, you know. You were loads better than Lockhart or Quirrell, Holly said. Well, I'm proud I was a better teacher than a servant of Voldemort or a serial fraud, Lupin said, smiling. More seriously, I was very glad to be able to finally meet you, Holly. You truly are a most remarkable witch, and I'm sure your parents would have been very proud of you, Lupin continued, and Holly couldn't help but smile, even if it was a little sadly. Thank you, Professor. It really meant a lot to me to hear about them from one of their friends, Holly said. Please, Holly. As I will very shortly not be your teacher, call me Remus, he said, and Holly indeed. In the last days of the term, the entire school got their results. Holly had done very well, scoring an outstanding in defense, charms, and care of magical creatures. She'd gotten exceeds expectations in everything else, by far her best results from a year at Hogwarts. Hermione had, of course, gotten outstanding for everything. Percy Weasley seemed to become almost an entirely different person after he received his new marks. He was calmer and less prone to giving out punishments. He even laughed at one of Fred and George's jokes. Holly thought that she had learned a lot this year, though a lot of it was outside of her classes. She'd learned to cast a Patronus, became an Animagus, and more besides. She looked forward to being able to go flying with Hedwig over the summer nights, to seeing Penny and all the other kids from Stonewall she'd keep in contact with through letters. Things had certainly changed from the dread she felt at the end of her first year, but she still felt a little sad to be leaving Hogwarts behind for the summer. Miss Potter. Dumbledore would like to speak to you in his office. The password is Ice Mice, Professor McGonagall told Holly on the last day of term, and although Holly was a little confused at the password, she walked all the way up the grand staircase and gave the password to the gargoyle. She found the inner door open, and so Holly walked right into Dumbledore's office. It was full of whirling contraptions and softly glowing artifacts. Portraits of past headmasters lined the walls, and further back Holly could see shelves full of books. Sitting in a comfortable-looking armchair, facing Dumbledore, was someone she had wanted to see again ever since that June night. Sirius. Holly said, rushing over to him. He stood, and she hugged him forcefully. He was still gaunt and a little unwell looking, but his hair was no longer one giant tangle and his robes were well made and clean. It's good to see you again too, Holly. I heard you were Remus's best student, Sirius said, and she blushed. I shall leave the two of you the office, Sirius. I will return here when they have need of you, the inquiry, Dumbledore said, as he stood up and threw some green powder into the fireplace. It roared to life with bright green flames, and Dumbledore stepped through it without concern. Sirius pulled over another armchair for her, and Holly sat down opposite him. So, I've been talking to Dumbledore about your living situation. I know you need to stay for a while with your aunt and uncle, but if you'd like to, you could live with me the rest of the time, Sirius said, and Holly was surprised to hear some nervousness in his voice. Of course I'd like that. Do you have a house? Where would we stay? Holly asked, excitedly. I did end up owning the old Black family home. From the little look I had in it, I'd say we'd be better off burning the place down for the insurance money, but it's a well-warded and large house in London. Not exactly an easy thing to find for sale, Sirius said. I suppose. If you don't like it, Holly said, trailing off. Don't worry about it, Holly. Remus and I will clean the place up while you're stuck with the Dursleys, and then, well, I think the three of us will probably drive my dear old mother's portrait mad, and that's the best use I can think of putting Grimmauld Place to, Sirius said, grinning. So Remus is going to be staying with us? Holly asked, innocently. Well, you know, it's hard for him to find a place, Sirius said, suddenly sounding very awkward. Is he your boyfriend? Holly teased, trying not to giggle. Yep. So don't go opening bedroom doors at will, young lady, Sirius said. You old guys making out, Holly said, and the two of them could no longer hold back their laughter. So I remember quite a few kids started dating in their third year. Anyone caught your eye? Sirius said, and Holly felt like she had challenged a master. No, nobody, she squeaked, blushing. Anyway, were you the one who sent me a firebolt at Christmas? A lot of people thought you did, although they also thought it was cursed, Holly said, desperately changing the subject. I had a few missed birthdays and Christmases to catch up on. And seeing you win the cup on it was worth every galleon, Merlin, but are you a great seeker, Sirius said. You were watching. As Padfoot? Holly asked. I couldn't miss watching my goddaughter play for Gryffindor now, could I? I tried to find you in Surrey, too, but you were already gone by the time I got there, Sirius said. Wait, that wasn't you near Hampstead? Holly asked, confused. That was the first time she'd seen the Grim, walking back to Hermione's house. Wasn't me. I know some wizards put a lot of stock in this whole Grim business, but it was probably just a stray, Holly Sirius said. Yeah, sure, there's something I need to tell you, Holly said. Actually, I think it's easier if I just show you, she said a moment later and transformed into her animal form. She caught at Sirius, and his eyes went wide. Of course you're an animagus before you're 14, was that how you caught Pettigrew? He was always bloody fast as a rat, Sirius said. Correct, Mr. Black, Holly said in a perfect imitation of Snape's voice, and Sirius's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. That is not something you should be doing, young lady, Sirius said, laughing. Holly transformed back and grinned at him. The train ride back to King's Cross Station was always a bit bittersweet for Holly, but she and her friends had a great time in their compartment. They ate wizarding sweets and played a raucous game of Exploding Snap. Hermione proved herself to be surprisingly good at the game and even managed to beat the twins when they wandered in, who had previously been the undisputed champions of Gryffindor Tower. Remind me never to play poker against our little bushy-haired card shark over there, George Fred said. Agreed. Those disgustingly high grades and thick books hide a gambler's heart, Fred George said. Shut it, you two, Ron said, but Holly could see he was trying not to laugh. Say, have you two ever heard of this muggle card game called blackjack? Hermione asked innocently, and the twins leaned in, interested despite themselves. Holly giggled, having seen enough television over Dudley's head to know why Hermione might suggest that game. You two'll come over this summer, yeah? Ron asked, and Holly nodded. The World Cup sounds completely mental, Holly said, and Ron smiled. It does sound interesting, Hermione said, and then Holly had said her goodbyes. She put her things on a trolley, let Hedwig out to fly to Privet Drive, and walked back through the barrier and into the Muggle world once more. Vernon Dursley was waiting for her, angrily reading the Daily Mail and muttering at passers-by. What surprised Holly, though, were the two men sitting opposite him. Remus Lupin wore a shabby, but a surprisingly ordinary, suit. On the other hand, Sirius was dressed in a manner that could only be described as cool. The clothes were a little out of date, but she saw more than one passing woman give him a second look. Hello, Uncle, Holly said, pleasantly. That always made her uncle mad. I've been hearing complaints about you, Beau Potter. Corrupting the neighborhood kids. I won't have it, Vernon said. Oh, you're here already, Holly, Sirius said, getting up. I'm Sirius Black, Holly's godfather. Had a rather unfortunate stint in Azkaban, false murder charges, that sort of thing. All that's cleared up now, though, Sirius said, holding out his hand for Vernon to shake. Holly thought her uncle might have a heart attack. Gigi, good to meet you, Vernon said fearfully. I'll just be popping over occasionally while Holly's staying with you, just to check up on things, Sirius said with an evil grin. Plus and plus. Winky screamed as the black uniformed men blasted in the door. Her master whirled around, his wand in his hand, but the hit wizard stunned him in moments. The proud old man crumpled to the floor, his wand rolling across the floor and under a couch. You will leave Winky's master's house. Winky shouted, and she snapped her fingers 3 times. 2 of the hit wizards went tumbling backwards, the potent elf jinxes sending them flying through the living room window. The third managed to shield herself from Winky's spell. Merlin's left bloody nut, we've got a fucking psychotic elf on our hands. Immobulus. She shouted, and Winky felt all her limbs freeze. She too fell to the floor, but she was still conscious. Kate, do you have it? One of the other hit wizards asked, as he and the third got up from Crouch's lawn and dusted themselves off. I've got it. Merlin, getting defenestrated by an elf, how did the two of you even pass your defense owls? I'll have you know I got an outstanding. Anyway, we've got Crouch, the poor bastard. What do we do with the elf? Leave it here, the hit witch said, and she and one of the hit wizards grabbed Crouch's unconscious body. All 4 then disappeared with a pop. Winky felt the magic binding her fade, and she started to cry. She had failed her master and her home. She was the worst elf that had ever lived, in her view. Then, with dawning horror, she remembered her other master. Hello, Winky. Seems dear old dad's been a little too naughty where someone was watching. Nice of them to leave me you, and what's this? His wand. Don't mind if I do, Barty Crouch Jr. said, tossing off Winky's master's invisibility cloak, and Winky let out a whimper. She was bound to the line of her master, by magic as ancient as any Winky knew of. Master Barty, you should not be doing such things. Master will be angry with you, Winky pleaded. Oh, I don't think he'll be feeling much of anything but despair for a very long time, Winky. You and I, though, you and I are going on a little trip, Barty Crouch Jr. said, his eyes alight manic energy. Notes. And with that, we close out Year 3. Chapter 35, Year 4, Chapter 1. Chapter text. Number 4 Privet Drive was just how Holly had left it, for the most part. It was still one of dozens of identical houses in neat little lines, each with perfectly manicured lawns and front gardens. As she got her things from her uncle's car, Vernon, of course, refusing to help, Holly waved to a familiar face walking down the street. Penny Harper was a very pretty girl who went to the local state school, Stonewall High. She was a year older than Holly and had introduced her to some of her friends who had formed a support group for queer kids. All of them were exactly the sort of people the Dursleys hated, and so Holly had quickly become friends with them. Penny returned Holly's wave, and as Uncle Vernon had already walked inside, she came over to talk to Holly. Holly. You're back from school? Penny said, and Holly nodded. It was then that Holly noticed Penny's new haircut, a short and daring one, at least for little whinging. How have you been, Penny? Holly asked. The two of them had sent letters to one another over the school year, but Holly was glad to talk to her in person. Not too bad for being stuck in little whinging. My mum's still asking if I have a boyfriend. I swear, that woman's capacity for self-delusion isn't human. So what's all this in your last letter about a secret godfather? Penny asked, and so Holly explained the story of Sirius Black as well as she could without magic. Then her aunt asked her what was taking so long, so Holly had to go inside. When she had put her trunk and other things in her room, Holly headed downstairs and saw something very unusual on the kitchen fridge. Stamped on official Smelting's letterhead was a diet sheet for one Dudley Dursley, stuck to the fridge with a magnet. Intrigued, Holly opened the fridge and found that the usual cavalcade of sugary drinks, processed foods and large slabs of meat had been replaced by what seemed to mostly be fruits and vegetables. She closed the fridge and saw Dudley walk morosely into the kitchen. He looked at her, and couldn't even say anything nasty. He just walked to the fridge, opened it, and sighed sadly. Holly found herself feeling a little sorry for Dudley, although the diet would probably be good for him, and better for her uncle. The kitchen television that Dudley had been so fond of had been smashed in, and Holly knew that his current depressed state would not last. Soon enough, there would be another tantrum. It seemed, though, that the school nurse at Smeltings had found something that even Aunt Petunia was willing to make Dudley do. Holly made sure to spend as much time as possible outside of Privet Drive that summer. Dudley had soon passed his phase of sullen depression and started taking out his frustrations on any convenient target. Luckily for Holly's friends, Dudley was more scared of her than he was angry. She spent her nights quickly finishing her summer homework and flying with Hedwig and often hung out with Penny and her friends from Stonewall. Holly sometimes had to think very quickly to come up with Muggle-appropriate explanations for things she said about her school. A few weeks into Holly's summer holiday, she attended another meeting. They were held in the back of a dingy local cafe in the summer, and as Holly entered it, she saw someone new sitting next to Penny. Holly had heard that Penny had a new girlfriend, as she seemed to do on schedule every few months, but that this time she didn't go to Stonewall. They had met somewhere in London, and Holly had only seen pictures of her before. She was a tall, dark-skinned girl dressed in exactly the sort of style Penny wore when she was out of her mother's grasp, and she looked up at Holly in surprise. You're that Holly Potter," she said, sounding shocked. By the way, her eyes darted to Holly's scar. She knew what she was being recognized for. "Yep, that's me," Holly said, sounding a little awkward. Penny was looking at her girlfriend a little strangely. "Oh, sorry. I'm Jane Thomas. My brother Dean goes to your school," Jane said. "It's fine. Say hi to Dean for me," Holly said as she sat down. "Oh, so what did Dean tell you about her?" Penny asked. The way he tells it, she's some kind of school legend or something. Did you really beat up a teacher? Jane asked. Well, he started it, Holly said, realizing with a start she was unsure which of her defense professors Jane was talking about. After the meeting ended, Holly walked over to the local park to enjoy the sunny day. All her summer homework was done, and she enjoyed sitting under her favorite tree, reading one of Dudley's unloved books. Dobby kept out of sight, as house elves liked to do, but he was around to keep an eye on her. The Dursleys didn't really need watching anymore, Sirius scarred them enough for that, but Holly appreciated Dobby's help all the same. Holly's nighttime flights were some of the best times she'd ever had at Privet Drive, even if Hedwig mostly enjoyed hunting mice and other things that Holly had no desire to try. She kept in regular contact with her friends from Hogwarts, writing letters on her worn-down desk. She heard from Sirius about his progress at clearing out the Black House on Grimmauld Place. He and Remus had been swarmed by a truly immense number of doxes today, apparently. Holly had managed to get some of her spending money from her vault changed to Muggle pounds, via our order, and she eagerly bought herself some new Muggle clothes. Some of that was driven by need, she was never going to be tall, but she was growing, and some of that was driven by the sheer excitement she still felt at getting to be her. She had started a subscription to the Daily Prophet, mostly for the sports pages. She read the news, always eager for word from the Wizarding world, but she mostly paid attention to the opening matches of the Quidditch World Cup. She was disappointed as England was knocked out early on in the competition by Transylvania, a brutal 390-10 stomping. Barty Crouch Sr., as the Daily Prophet made sure to note, was quite thoroughly made the symbol of everything that had led to Sirius being imprisoned unjustly by the Ministry. Crouch was called before the inquiry several times, and then eventually faced the full Wizengamot on charges of false imprisonment. Holly winced as she read that he had been sentenced to 5 years in Azkaban. Surely Crouch would not be popular there. She couldn't muster up too much sympathy, though. There was a certain ironic justice in the whole thing, sending a man to prison for imprisoning someone without a trial. Holly did find herself annoyed at the restrictions on using magic outside of school often over the summer. She wanted to practice the spells she read about, to chill her glass of water with a word, even just to cast something, anything. The night before her birthday, the night before Sirius would arrive and she wouldn't have to come back to number 4 Privet Drive for a year, Holly went to bed with a splitting headache. She fell to sleep surprisingly easily, as though she had been extremely tired, and then she began to dream. She was in a forest, forcing her vessel to obey her will. Torrential rain poured down, turning the ground into mud. Lightning flashed in the distance and, for a split second, Holly could see herself. This stolen body would last her only a few more days, her spirit breaking down the weak Muggle flesh from sheer proximity. Holly sat on a throne formed from twisted wood and bone. This vessel would be of use to her after it failed to, and she laughed at the terror she could feel in its pitiful mind. Her laugh was high and mocking, and Holly found it familiar. Lightning flashed again, and she whipped the eyes of her vessel around. Someone approached her, more than someone. 4 figures walked out of the darkness, with what could only be an elf trailing after them. The darkness of the forest night obscured their faces, their modes of dress, but she could feel them. She had senses beyond those of an ordinary wizard. One of the figures stepped forward, into the pale moonlight. Her heart sang as she recognized him, despite the years. After all these years spent hiding in the dark places of the world, and finally one of her so-called followers had found her. "My lord, I have returned," Barty Crouch Jr. said, bowing as he did so. His face had new lines, but his eyes were just as alight. Oh, Azkaban had not broken this one, she thought. But then she remembered his supposed fate. "Have you, Barty? Or does another wear your skin? For last I had heard you lay rotting in an unmarked grave on the Isle of Azkaban," she said, her voice doubled. Hers, and that of her vessel. "It is me, my lord. My mother took my place, and my father kept me prisoner with the Imperious Curse," Barty said, and she laughed. What bitter irony that Crouch himself had perverted the law so massively. "How did you escape?" "Your father was a most formidable wizard," she said, and it was true. The bitter old warhorse had hurt her forces dearly the last time around. "My father had a bit of a falling out with the current minister. Ended up getting dragged off by hit wizards. Perhaps they gave him my old cell," Barty said, cackling. "Oh, how your news brings me joy, Barty. Joy. But who are your friends, my dear boy?" she said, gesturing her vessel's hands towards the three shadowy figures. "You know I had contacts with those who felt as we did across the continent, and beyond, my lord. I did not wish to return to you empty-handed, and so I have brought to you 3 emissaries from those who wish to join our cause," Barty said, and for the first time, one of the shadowy figures spoke. "We are not alone, Barty. Someone is watching," a woman said, her accent marking her as French. "The Dark Lord is not the only spirit here," another voice said, and this one Holly didn't recognize. Holly saw one of the figures, the woman, step out of the darkness. Yet she could see nothing, just a haze in the air and a pair of glowing yellow eyes. The eyes darted this way and that until they snapped right towards Holly. She felt something touch her and then, suddenly, she woke in her bed. Sweat poured down her, and she touched her hand to her forehead and felt blood trickling from her scar. Her headache was worse and, despite the heat, she shivered. She needed to talk to Sirius about this. Chapter 36, Year 4, Chapter 2. Chapter Text. Holly still felt the pain in her scar as the sun crested the horizon, though the bleeding had stopped. She quickly showered, got dressed, and packed her things up to try and distract herself from worrying. She knew that she couldn't get a message to Sirius before he arrived, absent just trying to go to him directly. She, for once, carefully and neatly packed her things in her trunk. Hermione would be proud. She ate her piece of grapefruit nervously that morning, making sure to keep her wand in her pocket at all times. She knew that Voldemort wasn't going to burst into the Dursleys' living room, but the dream had rattled her. That man's eyes, she shivered, despite the summer heat. Holly was snapped out of her panic by the sound of a very loud motorcycle outside. As Privet Drive, and really Little Whinging as a whole was not the sort of place one typically encountered a motorbike, Holly looked out the window. There, having somewhat haphazardly parked a large black motorcycle, was Sirius Black. Holly's godfather was looking less gaunt than when she had last seen him, and she was so excited she ran out towards him. "Holly." "Sirius," she said, hugging him fiercely. "It's good to see you." "I think I'd have gone crazy if I had to spend any more time with them," Holly continued. "It's good to see you too, Holly. Go get your stuff, I'll just stand out here and embarrass your aunt," Sirius said with a grin. The leather jacket he was wearing, and his general demeanor would certainly cause the legendary gossips that were the housewives of Privet Drive to go into overdrive. Holly got her trunk down from her bedroom, along with Hedwig's cage. She'd already let her owl out last night. Hedwig, Holly knew, was more than capable of finding Grimmauld Place. Sirius put them into a compartment in the bike's sidecar that seemed to be much larger on the inside than the outside. "So are we really going to drive on this?" Holly asked. "I've been waiting to drive this thing again for a decade," Sirius said, and Holly got into the sidecar excitedly. Sirius revved the engine, and then Holly felt a very strange sensation. It was as if someone had cracked an egg on her head, and as she looked around she saw in amazement that she and the bike seemed to have become almost transparent. "What is this?" Holly asked. "Disillusionment charm," Sirius said with a grin, and then with one last roar of the engine, the motorcycle took off into the sky. It was great fun, and Holly spent much of the trip flying alongside the motorbike in the air as a raven. It was almost enough to make her forget her dream, as she soared across London. She transformed back for the last stretch of the journey, and after they landed and came to a stop, she turned to Sirius. "That was amazing," she said. "I thought you'd like it." "Happy birthday, Holly," he said, and hugged her. They had landed in an alley just off a row of large stone townhouses, all of them stately and imposing. Sirius got her stuff from the enchanted compartment, made the motorcycle invisible again, and led Holly around to the street. It was still early in the morning, and there was no one else around. A sign on the corner of the street read Grimmauld Place. A small plaque underneath caught Holly's eye, and she read it quickly. Due to a bureaucratic mistake at the end of the 17th century, Grimmauld Place has a number 11 and a number 13, but no number 12. Locals have resisted all efforts to renumber houses, and so the street's odd quirk of numbering remains. Sirius saw what she was reading, and chuckled. Of course, the end of the 17th century is also when the Statute of Secrecy was passed. My dear old ancestors performed a stupendous number of memory charms to get everyone to buy the mistake story, Sirius said and gestured towards one of the houses. There, looking a little more faded than its neighbors, was number 12 Grimmauld Place. It had a high stone fence, topped with iron spikes that looked lethally sharp. Small runes glowed an angry red in lines across the fence, and there was a great iron gate. "So this is where you lived as a kid?" Holly asked. "Rumus and I have cleaned out most of the tachydeca and dark artifacts, but yes," Sirius said, tapping his wand against the gate. It swung open, and the runes on the fence calmed down to soft blue light. Holly walked through the open gate, and she felt a strange sensation. Crossing the ward line always did give me a little shiver. Paranoid old bastards, the blacks. "But at least all those wards will be good for something now you're staying here," Sirius said, after seeing Holly's reaction. "I get the impression you liked them about as much as I like the Dursleys," Holly said, as they walked up to the large wooden door, which was, of course, painted black. "Worse. They weren't Death Eaters, but my parents thought Voldemort had the right idea, and the less said about most of my cousins, the better," Sirius said and opened the door. Holly thought at once that if this was Grimmauld Place after Sirius and Remus had spent a month taking out all the tachydeca, the blacks must have been the epitome of pure-blood pretentiousness. "I guess the fact that you're living here with your werewolf boyfriend is pretty good revenge, though," Holly said. "Oh, my mother's portrait has words to say about that. If people open the curtains, she starts screeching about, well, I'm sure you can imagine," Sirius said, laughing as he led Holly through a tour of the house. "Happy birthday," Holly Remus said as they entered the kitchen. He had some toast and rather rubbery-looking eggs on a plate, and Holly sighed. She could see a large number of Muggle takeaway food boxes too. "It's good to see you, Remus. Maybe I should handle the food from now on," Holly said. "From what Molly Weasley told me, you'd probably be better than either of us at it. My parents' old house elf was still around when we got here, but we've always hated each other. I set him free the minute I got here. From what I heard, he managed to get my dear cousin Narcissa Malfoy to take him in," Sirius said. "Narcissa Malfoy is your cousin?" Holly asked. "Oh, you haven't heard of the Black Sisters? They were infamous enough in their day. Bellatrix is in Azkaban for being a Death Eater, Narcissa married Lucius Malfoy, and Andromeda turned out to be a perfectly nice lady," Sirius explained. "Anyway, let me show you the rest of the house. People are coming round at noon for your birthday party, so you have plenty of time to do that odd teenage girl thing and spend 3 hours getting dressed," he continued. Holly rolled her eyes at him. Number 12 Grimmauld Place had everything from a library to a proper dueling room in its vast warren of wallpapered corridors. It was surely much larger on the inside than the outside, a triumph of expansion charms. Many of the rooms had clashing styles, clearly having been added on as the owners desired it. Sirius pointed out where things he'd removed had been, like the collection of house elf heads. One room had a huge tapestry with the names of all the various blacks on it, and Holly could see that work had clearly been done it recently. "And this is your bedroom," Sirius said, opening the door to show Holly the room. It was large, and done mostly in red and gold. There was a huge 4-poster bed, a desk that Holly thought must have belonged to someone important once, and a large window that looked out onto the street. There were cupboards and dressers, a place for her to put her broom, and even a relatively modern-looking radio sitting next to what was clearly a Wizard Wireless. It struck Holly then that she had somewhere she could leave things behind, that she no longer needed to live out of her trunk. This is great," Sirius Holly said and hugged him. "This used to be my room, I figured you'd like the window. Remus made me take down all the dirty posters, though," Sirius said, and Holly laughed. "I'll let you get your stuff put away, me and Remus's room is down that hall," Sirius said, and then closed the door behind him. She put her things away, smiling at the basilisk skin coat that Hagrid had given her last year. The resizing runes, a simple sizing charm wouldn't take to the magic-resistant basilisk skin, had kept it the right size for her. She found a good hiding place for her little black notebook and made sure it was hidden from anyone who might look for it. Then she closed the curtains and got ready for her birthday party. She didn't take all that long, but drying her hair was starting to take longer. She wondered idly if there were hair-drying charms. Maybe Parvati or Lavender would know, she thought. Sirius had evidently invited all her friends and then some more for her birthday party. All the Weasleys in the country came, and Molly Weasley stepped out of the fireplace holding a very large cake. Hermione was there, of course, but unlike all the other guests she'd been dropped off by her parents in a car. Hagrid had to stoop to get through the fireplace. Neville Longbottom came as well as Parvati Patil and Lavender Brown. It turned out that there were several types of hair-drying charms. Even Luna Lovegood came, and Holly smiled as she saw her step out of the living room fireplace. She was an odd one, but Holly thought Luna was quite nice and often a lot of fun. She managed not to cry this time, but Holly's 14th birthday was just as good as her 13th. Not only was there Mrs. Weasley's huge cake, but Holly and Sirius got to delight in introducing their mostly wizard-raised guests to pizza. Even Hermione found it amusing, but it soon won over all those present. Sirius, Remus, Hagrid, and Mr. and Mrs. Weasley mostly stayed in the living room, whilst Holly and her friends had the run of the house. Fred and George continued their streak of second secret gifts, though this one wasn't as interesting as the Marauders map, just a bottle of fire whiskey that Holly dutifully hid. After everyone had gone home, Holly sat in the kitchen with Sirius and Remus. Everyone had no real desire to do anything else that day, but Holly knew she had to tell them about her dream. Last night I had, I guess you could call it a dream. But I think it was real. Let me start again, Holly began, and she explained what she had seen in the dream. She couldn't identify anyone other than Voldemort, but both Sirius's and Remus's eyes narrowed at the Death Eater's story as Holly retold it. It couldn't be, Remus said slowly. I saw them carry his body away myself, Remus. Holly, what did he look like again? Sirius asked. He had black hair, tall, he'd be handsome if he didn't have this look to him, she said, trailing off at the end. She didn't really know how to describe it. The bastard really did it, Sirius said, his voice more than a whisper. It could be someone else, Sirius. Remus said. No. I'll remember those is until the day I die. He seemed so broken in Azkaban I even felt a little sorry for him despite what he did. I guess the joke's on me, Sirius said. Who do you think he is? Holly asked, confused. Barty Crouch. Junior, Sirius said, pausing for a moment before adding the junior. You mean the same Barty Crouch that sent you to Azkaban without a trial, had a Death Eater for a son? Holly said. The very same. I think we need to tell Dumbledore about his. I'll go right to him, Sirius said. Dumbledore came to Grimmauld Place that evening, and he had a strange look in his eyes as Holly finished telling him about her dream. I think we must start on at least Occlumency before the school year. Sirius, Remus, I trust the two of you can handle teaching Holly the basics. Dumbledore said. They nodded. What's Occlumency? Holly asked. The art of shielding one's mind against intrusion. I do not think that Voldemort can reverse your connection yet, but if he grows stronger, Dumbledore said. It could be bad. He'd be able to, read my mind? Or use you to influence the minds of others. It is lucky we discovered this connection whilst he was still so weak, and a pity it should cast a pall over today. Happy birthday, by the way, Holly, Dumbledore said, smiling at her. Thanks, Professor, Holly said. Well, we're all too full of cake to do it today, but tomorrow we're starting you on Occlumency, and I think we should put that dueling room my granduncle installed to some use, Sirius said, after Dumbledore had gone. Holly grinned. If Sirius was anywhere near as good as Remus, she'd learn a lot from both of them. Chapter 37, Year 4, Chapter 3. Chapter Text. Well, you're a hell of a lot better than we were at your age, Holly, Sirius said, lowering his wand. Both of them were out of breath, and Holly sat down against the side of the lowered dueling platform. The room consisted of a circular wooden dueling platform sunk into the floor, and wards to protect any onlookers sitting on the wooden benches that lined the walls. Remus had been observing Holly and Sirius duel, and he stood as he saw that their duel had come to an end. There are areas you could improve on, but I agree with Sirius, I've never seen a 14-year-old duel like that. That said, for your age doesn't count for much in the real world, Lupin said. I think I did pretty well against the, two adult wizards I fought, seriously, Holly said, wiping the sweat from her brow. She and Sirius had been at it for some time, and her body still ached slightly from being stunned several times. Lockhart and Pay, and the Rat aren't exactly the greatest duelists around. I'll grant you, both of them were fairly nasty, but almost all the actual Death Eaters were better than them, Sirius said. Actual Death Eaters? Holly asked, intrigued. Most people refer to all of Voldemort's wizarding followers as Death Eaters, but only a select few actually wore the robes and skull mask. The sort of garden variety dark wizards he attracted weren't given that honor, Remus explained. Right. He had hundreds of followers willing to fight, but only a few dozen actually wore the skull masks. Most of them are in Azkaban, but a few managed to slip the net by claiming to have been Imperiust, like Lucius Malfoy, Sirius said. I get it, so what do I need to do? Holly asked, holding her hands up. You've got a strong basis in terms of spell knowledge, although part of me would like not to know how you know so many curses. Like a lot of powerful young wizards and witches, you've got the firepower but not the speed and accuracy. Non-verbal spellcasting would be good, but it's only taught at Newt level for a reason, and your shield charms could still use some work, Remus said. And we happen to know a few tricks that might come in handy, Sirius said, and Holly grinned. But that's for tomorrow. Now that you're all exhausted, it's time to learn Occlumency, Sirius continued, and Holly's face fell. That was a dirty trick, she said. Would you expect anything else from a marauder? Sirius said. Holly just sighed, and Remus sat down opposite her. Occlumency has many forms and methods, from selective suppression to direct confrontation, but we're going to start with the basics today. At its core, occlumency is about controlling your mind to frustrate someone attempting to control or read it. The simplest method is to suppress all thought and emotion, to offer the legilimens nothing to see. I'm afraid the only real way to learn is experience, Remus said, and Holly suddenly felt uneasy. You mean you're going to read my mind? Holly said. She had plenty of things she didn't want Remus seeing, from the embarrassing to the illicit. I am. But I will be looking for a specific memory. Sirius is going to whisper a number to you, and I will attempt to find it. Are you comfortable with that? Remus asked. I guess. Yeah, it's fine, Holly said, questioningly. Sirius whispered the number, 23, into her ear. Legilimens, Remus said softly, and Holly tried to empty her mind of everything. It was, she thought, a dismal failure. Things kept bubbling up, everything from her dysphoria to her secret notebook to the number, and then it was over. She hadn't realized it had begun, but when Remus cut the spell off she felt it sharply. That's harder than it sounds, Holly said. Unfortunately, this really is the best way to learn. Ready to try again? Remus asked. I'm ready, Holly said. Her voice was steadier, and she tried once more to empty her mind. They spent only an hour or two on such things a day, but Remus and Sirius were a wealth of knowledge. Unlike defense class, neither of them held back when they taught Holly, at least, not any more than they would against each other for safety reasons. That meant that she lost a lot, often ending up stunned or disarmed or otherwise disabled, but she got better quickly. She cast her spells faster and was better able to hit her target when spells were flying at her. Most wizards, Remus informed her, could hit a practice dummy but not a dark wizard. Holly managed a weakened nonverbal shield charm and a nonverbal disarming charm. Her nonverbal stunning spells were more like love-it-ups than the knockout punches of her verbal stunning spells, but even that was tremendous progress. She learned how to use hexes and jinxes to distract her opponents, and how to make herself a harder target to hit. Sirius seemed to enjoy that lesson the most, as it consisted of firing jinxes at her until she got the hang of dodging. Her occlumency lessons were going less well, but she was making progress. She'd tried a few of the more advanced methods, but she was still working on mastering the basic one of clearing her mind. It was a tricky thing to manage, and Holly still couldn't entirely prevent things she wanted to hide from coming right in to fill any empty spaces she made. Aside from learning, Holly and Sirius spent a large amount of time flying after Sirius apparated them both to some remote location. Often they would be on brooms and play Wild 1A-side Quidditch, but sometimes Holly would take on her Raven form and Sirius would use his flying motorcycle. She lasted 2 weeks before she visited the library under the cover of her cloak. She wasn't sure why she did it in the dead of night, invisible, but she felt some wrongness about it. Sirius surely wouldn't have left anything too bad out for her to find, but she still woke up in the middle of the night with the dreams. She still felt her hands shake, sometimes. Holly remembered how every nerve in her body had burnt under Riddle's curse. She found what she had been trying to pretend she wasn't looking for quickly. Saw Laser Slytherin's signature lightning curse, incanted in Parseltongue. The slim book on famous curses didn't have the words or the wand motion, but Holly knew them. She could remember casting it more times than she could count, and the words seemed to come to her mind unbidden whenever she felt afraid. She knew that it required a desire to kill, to inflict pain, that the wounds caused by it would never heal. Holly shivered despite the temperature charms as she felt that sensation touch her mind just barely. The briefest brush from whatever power Voldemort had left behind, whispering to her. She heard the other spells it whispered to her, that she would be safe if only she could stop those who would hurt her. If only she could kill them. It would only take 2 words, she knew. She closed the book and returned to her room. Holly got back into bed and cried until her hands stopped shaking, and until she could no longer hear the whispers. The next morning, 2 owls arrived at the kitchen window as Holly blearily made breakfast. Remus could be trusted not to burn water, but toast was another matter, and Sirius had spent the past 12 years in Azkaban. If she wanted something decent to eat for breakfast, she was going to have to make it. She didn't handle all the food, but most of what Holly didn't make was Muggle takeaway. One of the owls was a large, regal bird with a letter bearing an official ministry seal. The other Holly recognized as Errol, the Weasley family owl. She took both letters, tore a slice of bacon in half, and gave one half to each owl. The ministry owl hooted imperiously and then left right away. Errol seemed to need some time to recover, so Holly gave him a little bowl of water to drink out of. She finished breakfast and brought the 2 letters with her, giving Errol a little wave as he left. The one from the ministry was addressed to Sirius, so she handed it to him along with breakfast. "And what does old Ludo Bagman want with me? How'd he end up as some ministry higher up?" Sirius asked. Old Carl Bagman had plenty of friends at the ministry, more than enough to get someone like Ludo Bagman a spot in magical games and sports, Remus said. "Well, he's head of the whole department, now. Seems he's sent 2 tickets for me and Holly to go watch the World Cup final in the minister's box, no mention of you, of course," Sirius said. "I'm sure the 2 of you really would enjoy it more than me," Remus said, but Holly saw the slightly pained expression on his face as she read through Ron's letter. Gears started to turn in her mind. Ron had sent a letter explaining that his dad had managed to get a number of seats in the Minster's box for the final, and inviting Holly to come with them and Hermione. Apparently Mr. Weasley managed to get a number of tickets to the Minister's box for the final and wanted to know if I'd like to come. "Let me write to them," Holly said with a grin. "Oh, now that would be good," Sirius said, laughing. Remus seemed resigned to it, but also happy. "I don't want to be Arthur in trouble at the ministry," Remus said. "So you can go with me. Holly will probably want to sit with her friends anyway, right?" Sirius asked. "Sounds good to me. You 2 can enjoy yourselves without me, I'm sure," she said. Sirius poked his tongue out at her. The next day Sirius dropped Holly off at the Burrow, both so she could see her friends and because she was technically attending with the Weasleys and not with Sirius. Holly felt slightly queasy from the side-along apparition. "You behave yourself now," Sirius said, struggling to keep a straight face. "I'd have thought you'd ask me to misbehave," Holly said, swaying a little. "Well, I know you're going to do that anyway. Thought I'd try out being responsible for a laugh," Sirius said and disappeared with a crack. "Oh, it's Holly," Ron said as he leaned out of his window to see who had arrived. She waved to him. "Oh, hello dear. Been enjoying your time with your godfather?" Mrs. Weasley said as she opened the door and beckoned Holly inside. "It's been great. Loads better than the Dursleys," Holly said. "Good to hear. Excited for the match?" "Oh, Charlie, you haven't met Holly before, have you?" "Nice to meet you, Charlie Weasley," the red-haired man playing wizard's chess against Bill said, standing to offer Holly his hand. She shook it, surprised at the number of scars she could feel. "Holly Potter. How are the dragons?" Holly asked. She and Ron had enlisted Charlie's help to smuggle a baby dragon Hagrid had started to raise to a sanctuary in Holly's first year. Dragons were illegal to keep as pets, or outside of designated reserve at all. "They only try and bite occasionally," Charlie said with a grin. Bill Weasley, who Holly had met once before, was still just as good-looking and cool as ever. He gave her a friendly wave as Charlie sat back down. "You're up with Ginny and Hermione," dear Mrs. Weasley said. Holly passed Fred and George on the stairs and opened Ginny's door. She and Hermione were taking out a mattress to put on the floor, and they both turned to Holly. "Holly," Ginny said, rushing over to hug her. Hermione smiled, but having been left holding the mattress by herself, she had to put it down before she could greet Holly. "Hey, Ginny. Been having a good summer?" she asked. "It's been great having Bill and Charlie back, and I've been so excited to see the World Cup final," Ginny said. "It's nice to see you, Holly. I hope you haven't been running too wild with Sirius," Hermione said. "Remus mostly keeps him in line, when he doesn't think it's funny," Holly says. "It's been great, though. Being able to cast magic over the holidays is awesome," Holly said. "Wow, did you get some special exemption from the minister or something?" Ginny asked. "You know the ministry can't track you if you live with an adult witch or wizard, right?" Holly asked. "That's... Mum's been lying to us. Mind you, I shudder to think about living in the same house as the twins when they can use magic at home," Ginny said. "Really? That's very unfair on those of us who live in the Muggle world," Hermione said. "I wouldn't put it past the ministry to make it work like that on purpose," Holly said. "No, I wouldn't either," Hermione said sadly. "Who do you reckon is gonna win the final, Ginny?" Holly asked as she sat down. "Well, you've got to consider Krum," Ginny said, and the two of them began to talk about the upcoming Quidditch match. Chapter 38, Year 4, Chapter 4. Chapter Text. "And if I hear from your father about you two hawking these wizard wheezes at the cup," Mrs. Weasley told Fred and George, her voice stern. Holly felt a little awkward at being there for that, and she caught Hermione's gaze, who seemed to feel similarly. Everybody was bleary-eyed and tired, having woken up well before the sun had come up. "Yes, Mum," the twins said in unison, as Mr. Weasley came downstairs. "Well, Holly, Hermione, what do you think?" "We're supposed to go incognito," Mr. Weasley said, gesturing to his outfit. His golfing sweater and old jeans were definitely far above most wizards' ideas of Muggle fashion. "Excellent, Mr. Weasley," Holly said. The rest of the Weasleys had managed mostly fine at dressing like Muggles, although Ginny had had to borrow some clothes from Holly. Hermione, to both Holly and Ginny's frustration, was significantly taller than them now. Holly had grown a fair bit herself, but she was still short for her age. Good, good. Everyone ready?" Mr. Weasley said. "Where are Bill and Charlie and Percy?" Ron asked. "They're apparating, so they can have a bit of a lie-in. Now, off you go, you've got a fair walk ahead of you." "Holly dear, do tell Sirius I said hello," Mrs. Weasley said, as she ushered them all out of the burrow. "I read that 100,000 wizards will be watching the cup in the stadium. How are you keeping any Muggles from noticing?" Hermione asked as they walked away from the burrow. "It's enormously complicated, Hermione. Firstly, we haven't a magical site large enough to house all of them, so we've had to resort to finding a nice bit of deserted moor. Then we have the problem of transport," Mr. Weasley began, and he explained all about how arrivals were being staggered by their seat price. "But surely not everyone can take Muggle transport or apparate. How are we getting there, for starters?" Hermione asked. "Portkey. The nearest ley line is a bit of a walk, but if I tried to side along all of you we'd all end up splinched across half of England," Mr. Weasley said, and they all shuddered. Holly had seen some very graphic images of people who had splinched themselves during a lecture on why they were not to try to apparate without proper training. "Ley line? I thought Portkeys let you leave from anywhere?" Holly asked as they walked through the darkened streets of Ottery St. Catchpole and up the slope towards Stokesheed Hill. "Oh, no. Portkeys allow travel along ley lines, and that's it. You see." "Oh, hello Amos," Mr. Weasley said, as two figures stepped out of the pre-dawn darkness. One was a portly middle-aged man, with graying brown hair and a scrabbly beard. The other was Cedric Diggory, an extremely handsome boy of around 17. Holly had narrowly beaten him to win the Hogwarts Quidditch Cup last year, and she smiled as she saw him. So did Hermione and Ginny. Ron scowled. "Good to see you, Arthur, good to see you. This must be your kids, but who are the extra girls?" Amos Diggory asked. "That's Holly Potter and Hermione Granger," Mr. Weasley began, only for Mr. Diggory to cut him off. "My word, is it really? An absolute pleasure to meet you, Miss Potter. Cedric has told me quite a bit about you, and of course, I've read about you in the papers. I told Cedric that nearly beating you in that final, that's a story for the grandkids. Mr. Diggory said, offering his hand to Holly. She shook it and winced at Mr. Diggory's tight grip. Nice to meet you too, Mr. Diggory. Hi, Cedric, Holly said, a little awkwardly. Good to see you, Holly. Excited to watch the cup? Cedric asked as they all climbed the hill. Holly was glad that Cedric couldn't see her blush in the darkness. It sounds like it'll be a great match. The Irish are in top form, of course, but Holly said, and Cedric nodded. Both of them were seekers, and Holly had no doubt that if she asked him who the best seeker alive was, Cedric would answer Victor Crumb. The fact that he was Cedric's age merely made it more impressive. As they crested the hill, the first rays of pre-dawn light could be seen on the horizon. The wind blew softly across Stoatshed Hill, and Holly could feel the magic in the air and in the earth. It was a little like being at Hogwarts, but less so. On the very top of the hill sat an old boot on a stump. It looked tattered and smelly to Holly, which her nose soon confirmed. That's the portkey? Holly asked. Can't make it too obviously magical or even the muggles might figure out what's going on, Mr. Diggory said. Mr. Weasley frowned slightly. Cedric looked a little embarrassed. Well, anyway, let's all touch the portkey. Just a finger will do, Fred, Mr. Weasley said. Fred had touched it with his foot, to stifled laughs from all of the children. Anyone else coming, Dad? Cedric asked. The Lovergoods have been there for weeks, and the Forleys couldn't get tickets. Have I forgotten anyone, Arthur? I can never remember all the half-bloods running around, Mr. Diggory said. No, that's all of Mr. Weasley said, only to be cut off as the portkey activated. Holly felt like she had been dunked into boiling water, and then everything became a whirl of colors and motion. Her finger felt glued to the boot, the only solid object in the sea of swirling color. She was being whipped around, and then Holly felt herself slam into the ground. 5:07 from Stoatshed Hill called out a bored voice, as Holly got to her feet. Everyone but Mr. Weasley, Mr. Diggory, and Cedric had fallen flat on their face. A pimply-faced advisor, who looked about 16, was standing just in front of them. He was dressed in a cheap suit that didn't fit him, with a red sash across his front that read LIB, Traffic Division. An older man, with barely any of his wispy grey hair left, sat next to him with a golden stopwatch. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a film about William Wallace, kilt and all. Now that's a way to travel. How was that, kids? Mr. Weasley asked, grinning. I think I'd have rather ridden here, Fred said. What's 500 miles on a broom compared to that, George said. Oh, you'll get used to it. Of course, some are better suited to handling it than others, Mr. Diggory said. Morning, Basil, Mr. Weasley said to the older, kilt-wearing wizard with the stopwatch. Morning, Arthur. You'd best get out of the way right quick, we've got a huge party from the Black Forest coming in at 5:15, and you know how they are. All those Vons and their 24 house elves, here we are. Quarter-mile that way, first field you come to, talk to a Mr. Roberts. The second field for you, Amos, Basil said. Thanks, Basil, Mr. Weasley said, and they all headed off across the deserted moor. The mist was thick, and Holly put her hand into the pocket of her coat. She felt her wand, ever so slightly warm, and that was enough reassurance. So, Cedric, how has your summer been? Hermione asked. Oh, not too bad. We went to Italy for a bit, watched a few of the earlier World Cup matches. How about you, Hermione? Cedric answered. Holly felt a flash of jealousy run through her, a sudden but strong desire for Cedric to be talking to her instead of Hermione. It wasn't like Hermione was flirting with him, she was just being polite, Holly knew, but she felt it all the same. She stewed in her thoughts as they walked through the mist, questions consuming her. Did she like Cedric in a romantic sense? She felt unsure if she liked girls, or boys, or both, a heady sort of mix that refused to settle down. She knew she had been crushed when she'd learned Penny had a girlfriend, and that she thought Cho Chang was very pretty, yet she was jealous when Cedric talked to Hermione. Both, then, but it was all very confusing. As she'd been thinking, a small stone cottage had emerged from the mist. In the distance, as Holly looked up, she could see a sea of tents faintly through the mist. They seemed to sway slightly in the breeze, and they were of 100 bizarre styles. One seemed to be a narrow tower 5 stories tall, and Holly wondered how that could be useful or safe. "I think this is where we part ways, Amos." "It was good to see you and Cedric," Mr. Weasley said. "Good to see you too, Arthur," Mr. Diggory said. "See you all at Hogwarts," Cedric said, waving as he walked into the mist. "Are those sighs of disappointment I hear from the ladies?" Fred asked. "Don't worry, he'll be just as handsome at Hogwarts," George said. Holly blushed, and she was sure Ginny and Hermione did so too. "Knock it off, you twits. As if you don't stare longingly at Angelina every time she walks in your direction, or away from you," Ginny said. "You wound us, sister." "Why, we would never give in to such base impulses," George said. "Morning." "Blimey, are you that Holly Potter lass my daughter keeps talking about?" a man said, as he walked out of the cottage. He looked like he was Muggle-born, or maybe just a Muggle because his clothes looked perfectly normal. "That's me," Holly said. "When those wizards asked to use my campsite, me having a witch for a daughter and all, I wasn't expecting quite so many illustrious folks. Good sport, though, Quidditch. Not as good as football, though. Anyway, you'll be wanting your map. You're in this spot right here," he said, handing a paper map to Mr. Weasley. "Thank you, Mr. Oh, that's damn impolite of me. Josh Roberts," he said, shaking Mr. Weasley's hand. "Arthur Weasley. I was, under the impression that these were Muggle campgrounds." Mr. Weasley asked. "Oh, they are. All the other poor blokes running them keep getting their minds fiddled with. Damn fool thing to do, but that's government for you, eh? Seems like the same idiots in London if you've got a wand or not. Will you need any help paying in Muggle money? Can't take galleons, drachma, or talents, I'm afraid," Mr. Roberts said. Mr. Weasley looked a little awkward, but Holly and Hermione helped him work out the Muggle money and then they were on their way. Holly thought it was lucky that the manager of Campground 1 knew about magic, because none of the tents she saw could ever have been believable as Muggle tents. Nor could the outfits. She passed a group of Americans dressed in jean shorts, dinner jackets, and bow ties who stopped to get into an argument with a woman dressed in a combination of chainmail and an aviator's outfit from the 1920s. Said woman was leading her winged horse through the streets of the tent city, and it had apparently trodden on something. "Well, I can see that some of us are taking the law more seriously than others. It seems we really can't help but show off when we get together," Mr. Weasley muttered. Some of the tents could almost have passed for Muggle tents, but invariably they had a weather vane or a tower, or in one case battlements. They seemed to walk through the entire campground before they came to an empty plot with a wooden sign staked into it that read, in handwritten letters, "Weasley." Across from them was another empty plot that read black. "We putting the tents up Muggle style, Dad?" Ron asked. "Exactly, Ron, exactly. We're not supposed to be using magic here, technically. Do you think you could help us work this out, Holly, Hermione?" Mr. Weasley said, taking off his backpack. Holly had, of course, never been camping, but she and Hermione were able to help Mr. Weasley get the 2 one-man tents set up fairly rapidly. They looked positively pedestrian compared to the gaudy tents around them, although comically small compared to the number of people standing around them. "All right, girls, that's your tent, but this one has the kitchen and living room, so feel free to come in after you get settled," Mr. Weasley said. Holly blinked. She knew that the tents were magically expanded, but she'd expected the inside to just be a bigger tent. She headed into the girls' tent and was amazed to find a room with a floor, carpet, and a fireplace. There were a pair of comfortable-looking bunk beds, and plenty of space for all 3 of them to put their backpacks down. "Whoa," Holly said. "Dad got these cheap second-hand when we went to Egypt, but they are still pretty great," Ginny said, pausing for a moment after that. Then she got an evil look and dashed towards one of the bunk beds. "Top bunk's mine," she shouted. Hermione turned to look at Holly, but she had already claimed the other top bunk. "Oh, very mature," Hermione said. Holly stuck out her tongue at her. Chapter 39, Year 4, Chapter 5. Chapter text. The other tent was larger than the girls' tent, and it looked to Holly like someone had put a three-room apartment inside of a very large tent. The walls were still made from fabric, but there was everything from a fully functioning kitchen to a bathroom complete with a shower. "How's the tent, girls?" Mr. Weasley asked. "It's fine, Mr. Weasley. I never knew wizards made tents like these," Holly said. "It was fairly cramped with all the people jammed into it, but for one or two people it would have been positively luxurious. Well, this is something of a deluxe model, if a little out of date. Picked it up on the cheap from a friend at the office who didn't use it anymore," Mr. Weasley said. Fred and George were busy checking on things in their backpacks, which Holly assumed weren't just spare clothes judging by the twins' furtive expressions. "Do some wizards just live in tents like these?" Hermione asked. "It's not uncommon among people who have to travel long distances for their work and the like, though not as much as it used to be," Mr. Weasley said, as he picked up a dusty kettle. "We'll be needing some water," he continued. "There's a tap marked on the map the guy at the entrance gave us," Ron said from the kitchen. "Excellent. We're going to give camp cooking Muggle style a try, so why don't you four go fetch some water?" Mr. Weasley asked. "Need us to go get anything, Dad?" Fred asked. "Oh, I think I'll need you two to help start the fire," Mr. Weasley said, innocently. "Foiled again," Fred George said. Holly, Ron, Ginny, and Hermione headed out of the tent clutching kettles and saucepans. The sun had fully risen by now and the mist had begun to lift, so Holly could see the full size of the tent city they found themselves in. She couldn't help but think it was very lucky that wizard tents had their own toilets, because there seemed to be far more people at the campground than it had ever been intended to house. Children ran around playing, much younger than any magical children Holly had ever seen. She saw everything from toy wands and broomsticks, that seemed to work, if only in a very reduced and safe manner, to animated soft toys. Ministry officials walked through the tents desperately trying to keep order, but it was clear that the excitement was running far too high for all the small children to convincingly pose as Muggles. "I've never even heard of so many wizards in one place before. I think this might be the largest magical settlement in the world," Holly said as they walked through the tent city. "It's not the largest, but it's close," Hermione said. "It's bloody, really bloody green," Ron said after he turned a corner mid-sentence. Almost instantly, every tent around them seemed to covered in green decorations. Some were so thick with shamrocks that they looked like small hills rising out of the grass, while others seemed to have been stitched from disused Irish Quidditch robes. "I think we've found the Ireland fans," Ginny said. "Nah, I reckon we've found the Bulgarians," Holly said. Holly, Ginny, Ron, Hermione, a familiar voice cried out, and as one they turned to see their fellow Gryffindor Seamus Finnegan. He was fully decked out in almost neon green robes, his face already painted. Dean Thomas, another of Holly's classmates from Gryffindor, was also standing outside the same tent as Seamus. Dean was less green, with only a moderately bright green jumper, and standing next to him was someone Holly recognized with a start. "Jane," Holly said, surprised to see Dean Thomas's Muggle sister here. "Holly," Jane Thomas said, looking just as surprised as Holly. "How on earth do you two know each other?" Dean asked. "Oh, you know that, friend from school I introduced you to." "Holly's friends with her," Jane said, blushing a little. Holly got the message. "What are the chances, hey Holly? This place is mad, though. I think I saw some guy fly over us on a winged horse a few minutes ago," Dean said. Seamus, Ron, and Ginny were having an animated conversation about the upcoming match. "It's something, all right. How's Penny?" Holly asked Jane. "Oh, she's fine. Her mum's being, well, like Penny's mum always is," Jane said. "Who do you reckon will win, Holly?" Seamus asked her. Everyone seemed to turn and stare at Holly, even Seamus's mum. She considered her response carefully. From what she knew about the two teams, Ireland had a better overall team, but Krum was significantly better than the Irish Seeker. "I think that if it lasts longer than an hour, then Ireland has it. If the snitch gets spotted early, though," Holly said. "Come on Holly, Lynch isn't that bad," Seamus said. "He's good. But not as good as Krum, honestly. Lynch is the weakest part of the Irish team," Holly said. After some more talk, and giving Seamus's mum assurances that they would be supporting Ireland, Holly and her friends wandered deeper into the tent city. They walked through what had to be a Bulgarian section, which was covered in moving posters of Viktor Krum. Holly couldn't understand the song that was being sung, but it was very loud and only getting louder. She had heard 100 different languages as she walked through the tents, with witches and wizards seemingly coming from all over the world to this misty moor to watch the World Cup. There were student groups from a dozen different schools just in this campground alone, including a huge delegation from an Irish school with a truly gigantic shamrock-covered tent that looked more like a grassy mountain than a hill. She said hello to several more friends and acquaintances, including her old Quidditch captain Oliver Wood. He had apparently been picked as the Puddlemere United reserve keeper, and he told her that their current keeper was retiring next season. She shook hands with his parents, and then finally Holly arrived at the tap. "Of course there's a line," Ron said. "At least we got here early," Hermione said. They had to wait perhaps 10 minutes to fill up their assortment of pots and kettles and spent most of that time watching all the strange attempts at looking like muggles their fellow attendees made. One particularly oddly dressed wizard wore a perfectly cut and tailored suit, except that it seemed to have been made from high-visibility material. "Hey, Holly," someone said from behind them in line, and Holly turned to see Cho Chang waving at her. She waved back, and from the clanking of her pot, she was glad it hadn't had any water in it yet. "Hey, Cho," Holly said, but the line moved up and she lost sight of the pretty Ravenclaw seeker. "Happy to see her, were you?" Ron asked. "Shut it," Holly said, blushing. Ginny rolled her eyes. After that, they made their way back to the tents without much fuss. They ran into a few more friends and acquaintances along the way, and as they approached the Weasleys' tents Holly smiled. Across from them, in the plot marked black, was a normal-looking tent. Sirius and Remus sat outside it on folding camp chairs, both of them passing very convincingly as muggles. They both even looked fashionable, as far as Holly's very limited understanding of men's fashion went. "Sirius," she shouted. He waved at her lazily, clutching a bottle of Waldemann's Wizard Brewed Ale in one hand. He was talking to Bill Weasley in a low voice, whilst Charlie and Percy were sitting by the Weasleys' tent. "I see you lot took your sweet time," George said. "Your lost mates." Old Ludo Bagman came by, taking bets. "We're gonna clean him out, and we discussed an exciting business opportunity," Fred said. "We ran into people." Holly nearly tripped over herself saying hello to Chiron said. "She did not," Ginny said, a little sharply. "Ah, if you'll hand the water over," Mr. Weasley said, breaking the moment of tension. Soon everyone had breakfast and some hot tea, and they spent a very pleasant afternoon simply lounging about talking to people who came by. Holly must have had her picture taken 20 times. She'd decided to support Ireland in the end, as had the Weasleys and Hermione. They wandered through the market stalls that had been set up just beyond the campground, and Holly bought Ron, Hermione, and Ginny a pair of omnioculars each. The magical binoculars could zoom in, replay things in slow motion, and even follow the action of a Quidditch match automatically. "It's almost time, everyone ready to go?" Mr. Weasley asked. Holly darted into the girls' tent and very quickly exchanged her ratty trainers and faded jeans with something nicer. She didn't really care about impressing the type of people who would be in the top box, but she was sure a picture of her there would end up in the Dearly Prophet. She didn't have anything really green except, she put her basilisk skin coat on, the forest green scales a perfect color for her chosen team. Sirius and Remus went on a good 15 minutes ahead of them, and then Mr. Weasley led everyone else towards the stadium. The sense of excitement was palpable as Holly moved through the crowd, and she couldn't help but gasp when she saw the sheer size of the stadium. It was taller than any Muggle stadium Holly could remember, with a number of soaring towards going up even higher. The walls glowed a soft gold, and huge purple banners hung off the sides. Each bore a stylized Ministry M in gold thread. "Built especially for this match, you know." "A capacity of 100,000, Percy said, sounding as proud as if he'd built it himself. "Half the Ministry have been busy building it for the last 6 months. And the anti-Muggle wards had to get the Unspeakables to handle that part," Mr. Weasley said. "Unspeakables?" Holly asked. "Ministry researchers, top secret sort of stuff," he explained. "Oh, hello Arthur. Let me see those tickets, top box. You are a lucky one. All the way up, Dears, one of the ministry attendants at the entrance to the stadium said. No chance wizards have invented lifts this summer? Hermione asked as she looked up at the long staircase up. Maybe we should have brought brooms, Holly said as they all began to climb. Sometime later, they all emerged into the top box. It was right behind one set of golden goalposts, the absolute prime position to sit. There was a thick purple carpet, and perhaps 20 gilded chairs sitting in 2 rows. All of them had little placards next to them denoting which party they belonged to, and Holly saw Sirius and Remus some distance away from the Weasleys. As she was looking at the chairs, Holly heard someone else come up the stairs. She turned, and her eyes widened ever so slightly. Minister Fudge was leading a pair of foreign wizards up the stairs, and with him were Draco, Lucius, and Narcissa Malfoy. All of them wore black and silver dress robes, and as Lucius saw the Weasleys, he sneered. By Merlin, how much gold did Potter spend on you, Weasley? Surely you didn't afford these seats yourself. Lucius Malfoy said with a sneer. Mr. Weasley looked angry, Fudge looked worried, and Holly felt a sudden desire to see Lucius Malfoy defenestrated from this height. She regretfully put that idea aside and turned to respond. Chapter 40, Year 4, Chapter 6. Chapter Text. Some of us don't need to give out galleons to get others to like us, Lucius Mr. Weasley said, coldly. Or give out diaries, Holly said, quietly. She looked Lucius Malfoy right in the eye and felt a deep sense of satisfaction as he refused to meet her gaze. Draco just looked confused, but Narcissa Malfoy looked unsettled by Holly's words. My word, is that you, Holly? Fudge said. He looked slightly panicked that Mr. Malfoy and Mr. Weasley were getting into an argument in front of his guests. Oh, hello, Minister. Who's that with you? Holly said, and all trace of venom or fury was gone from her voice. This is the Bulgarian Minister for Magic, Minister Orblansk. Charming fellow, but I'm afraid he doesn't speak much English, Fudge said, as he gestured to a tall man standing next to him in deep velvet robes. He looked rather heavyset, and his long hair was almost entirely grey. Nice to meet you, Minister Orblansk, Holly said. She shook his hand as her words were relayed by an interpreter. If there hadn't been that damnable dragonpox outbreak, the Irish minister would have been here too. Lovely lady, I'd imagine the two of you would get on well. And of course, you know my guest Mr. Lucius Malfoy and his family, Fudge said. We've met, Holly said. Do excuse Mr. I'm sorry, Miss Potter's frostiness towards my son, Minister. They are often rivals on the Hogwarts Quidditch fields, you know, Lucius said. Ah, yes. Well, good to see you, Holly, Arthur. The mascots are nearly out, so let's take our seats, shall we? Fudge said, looking rather awkward. One by one, the seats in the top box filled up until only the commentator's seat with its attached microphone and array of special omnioculars was left. Each pair of omnioculars was set to follow a specific player, with little figurines of each taped on top of them. Just before the mascots were ready to take to the field, Ludo Bagman charged into the top box. He was a huge man, broad-shouldered and still muscled below the extra layer of fat he'd gained after he'd stopped playing professional Quidditch. Despite his size, his face looked almost cherubic, with bright blue eyes and messy blonde hair. Just on time, Ludo Fudge said, and Bagman grinned at him. I've just been saying hello to the Bulgarian mascots, had to fight them off just to get up here in time. Bagman said, grinning. Orblansk gave Bagman an odd look. Yes, well, let's get the match started, Fudge said, looking at his watch. Bagman took his seat, gave the antique-looking microphone a check, and smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the final of the 422nd Quidditch World Cup. Bagman shouted into the microphone, and the crowd below roared. It was like nothing Holly had ever heard, 100,000 voices all cheering at once. There were other sounds too, flags that played a team's national anthem when waved by the thousand, hundreds of large drums, and more still. A huge blackboard that had previously been displaying an ad for Bertie Bott's Every Flavor Beans changed to display the scores in a cloud of enchanted chalk dust. And now, without further ado, allow me to introduce the Bulgarian national team mascots. Bagman said, and Holly heard Sirius laugh in the row of seats behind her. The Malfoys seemed to tense up as one, and even Mr. Weasley looked a little nervous. That'll be the Vila, Mr. Weasley said, sounding a little nervous to Holly. What had the Bulgarians brought, she wondered. Were Vila some kind of fearsome beast, a subspecies of dragon, maybe? Then about 100 Vila danced out onto the pitch, and Holly found her questions answered. Vila were women, with hair like strands of precious metals and eyes like jewels. Their skin seemed to emit soft moonlight, and they moved with inhuman grace. Surely, they couldn't be human. Nobody could look like that, Holly thought. Her objections melted away as she watched them dance. The Vila started to sing, and an unseen band played some kind of harmony of stringed instruments. Holly felt her mind start to fog as if nothing else existed save the Vila. She had to impress them, make them pay attention to. And then the song stopped, and Holly felt her mind rush back. She was standing up, as were Fred and George. Ron was nearly over the barrier, though Mr. Weasley was pulling him back. Draco Malfoy was halfway to the barrier himself, and Holly felt a flash of shame. Was this magic that only worked on boys, she wondered. Then she turned her gaze to her left, and she saw Ginny was standing up just like her. Hermione seemed unaffected by the Vila, and all of the adults seemed like they had been able to retain some sense. Holly felt the shame that had been rushing to fill every inch of her fate at the sight of Ginny standing up. She still blushed as she sat back down, but more from the implications. She thought she understood who was affected by the Vila's song now. Ginny had never said anything about it to her, but as she caught Holly's eyes she blushed. As she sat down, Holly saw that wards had been erected around the stands and that quite a few people had been saved from leaping off the stands by them. Perhaps it had just been the atmosphere of excitement that permeated the entire stadium, but the Vila had a powerful effect on much of the audience. Let's all give the lovely ladies from Bulgaria a round of applause. Up next, let's all light up our wands for the Irish national team mascots. Bagman shouted, and what followed was no less amazing than the Vila. The leprechauns that were the Irish team's mascots flew around the stadium in an incredible display of formation flying, and then swooped down low over the crowd and started throwing out handfuls of gold coins. Ron eagerly caught a half-dozen of them, and even Holly picked one off the floor to look at it. It bore the face of a grinning leprechaun on both sides, and whilst it felt like the right weight, something seemed off about it. Holly focused on the coin and noticed that it seemed to let through a little light. It was fake, then, which, she thought ruefully, certainly made more sense than the Irish team giving out a fortune in gold. Then the game itself started, and Holly was transfixed. It was Quidditch at a level she had never seen before, utterly fluid and pushing even the firebolts both teams rode to their limits. The chasers screamed through the air at hundreds of miles per hour, weaving through the storm of bludgers and blocking attempts to score goal after goal. When Bulgaria scored its first goal, after Ireland had scored 3, the Vila danced again. Holly was ready this time, and applied the occlumency techniques Sirius and Remus had taught her. She could still feel the song of the Vila touch her mind, but she was able to keep her wits about her. Ginny just put her fingers in her ears. It was clear to Holly that Bulgaria had only got to the final on the back of their seeker. Their chasers were good, but they just weren't up to the speed or fluidity of Ireland's chaser squad. The Bulgarian chasers were too rigid, too dependent on formations and plays to keep up with the excellent teamwork of the Irish chasers. The beaters were more evenly matched, but again the Irish keeper was superior. Only Crumb was better than his Irish counterpart. Holly had heard how good he was, and his stats backed him up, but as she saw him fly she knew he was the best seeker in the world. His almost casual goading of Lynch, the Irish seeker, into a Runsky feint, the way Crumb managed to put his all into helping his team's outmatched chasers whilst still keeping an eye out for the snitch. But it wasn't going to be enough, Holly realized. The snitch wasn't making an appearance, and the score was climbing faster and faster. The Irish bludgers had worn down the Bulgarian chasers by now, and they were losing more and more possessions. Is he going to catch it? Ginny asked Holly in a quiet voice. As soon as he sees it. Crumb knows they can't win, Holly said, her voice utterly certain. And so Crumb did, leading Lynch into the ground again and catching the snitch with Ireland up by 160 points. The stadium erupted into noise, and so did even the top box. That hit he took from the bludger must have scrambled Crumb's brains. Why'd he catch it when they were 160 points behind? Ron asked. because they were never going to get any closer. Crumb wanted it to be a close thing, not a blowout. He caught it to save his teammates' reputations, Holly said. She heard, to her surprise, Draco Malfoy say much the same thing to his parents and the minister. Fred and George had apparently won quite a bit of money from Ludo Bagman by betting on this exact outcome, in addition to the gold they'd earned selling their inventions. Everyone was in a very good mood as they walked back through the forest to the campground. The Irish fans were celebrating loudly, but there was a good-natured cheer about the whole thing. Holly saw a group of Irish fans, decked out entirely in shamrock cloaks, drinking with a group of Bulgarian fans at the very entrance to the campground. They gave her a cheer as she walked past, and Holly realized with a start that they'd recognized her. They all stayed up quite late, drinking hot chocolate and talking about the match. Holly, Charlie, and Ginny all defended Crumb's actions to the rest of the Weasleys. Eventually, after Ginny fell asleep at the kitchen table, everyone headed off to bed. Holly was so sleepy she only took off her coat and shoes before she climbed into her top bunk in the girls' tent and fell asleep. Her dreams featured her in the World Cup, being introduced by Bagman. Somehow, despite the fact that she was playing for England in this dream, her team's mascots were also Vila. Holly woke to a loud sound nearby. The Irish fans had been letting off fireworks all night and shooting spells into the air, but this sounded different. Then she smelled it, the stench of rotting eggs and ash. She leapt down from her bunk bed, putting on her shoes and coat as Mr. Weasley burst into the tent. "Everyone up," he shouted. Ginny groggily moved towards her clothes, having gotten changed into her pajamas, but Mr. Weasley shook his head. "Just put a jacket on and get your shoes, then come outside. There's no time or anything else," Mr. Weasley said. "What's going on?" Holly asked as she drew her wand and excited the tent. She could see people running this way and that, screaming loudly. Sirius and Remus were dressed and had their wands out, as did most of the older Weasleys. Holly saw it, then. A mass of wizards moving across the field towards the campground, clustered tightly together. They seemed for a moment to lack faces, but then Holly realized that they were just wearing skull masks. Roiling snakes formed from fire slithered through the grass in front of them, setting it alight. People were running into the woods to get away from them, but they were firing spells at anybody they could see. One elderly man was hit by a bolt of purple light, and Holly nearly threw up as she saw his entrails violently exploded from his stomach. One of the snakes rushed towards him, and then Holly realized how big they were. It opened its flaming jaws, and swallowed the man whole. He barely had time to scream before he was consumed by the fire. "Death Eaters, Arthur, we need to get her out of here," Remus shouted. "What? No, I want to help," Holly said, and before anyone could stop her or she could think sensibly about the situation she had dashed off towards the crowd. She was faster on her feet than any of them, and before anyone had thought to use a spell on her she was out of their line of sight. She saw three people, one was the campground manager, and the other two must have been his wife and daughter, floating in the air above the Death Eaters. All three seemed to have been repeatedly jinxed and hexed, to the drunken cheers of the mob of Death Eaters. Holly saw someone rushing away from the crowd fall, and her heart stopped as she realized who it was. Jane Thomas had tripped over a root, and from the sound of her scream had twisted something badly. Dean was trying to help her up, as was Seamus. Holly saw one of the snakes, nearly the size of the basilisk she'd killed and made entirely out of fire, rear up over the three of them. Time seemed to slow, and the whispers got louder. In the dark night, the fiery snakes seemed alive to Holly. They moved with a malevolent intelligence, delighting in setting everything they could reach aflame. Holly could hear the awkward, practiced hisses the Death Eaters were using to order them around. "Stop!" Holly hissed, and the fiery snake stopped mid-bite. Jane got up, and Dean and Seamus managed to drag her out from under the flaming snake. Holly looked at the screaming, writhing form Mr. Roberts' young daughter, who couldn't be more than 13. She felt the rage boil up inside her, and she listened to the whispers. "Turn on your master, devour he who created you." Holly screamed in Parseltongue, knowing that the Fiendfyre would obey her over its master. It would have no choice to accept the orders of a true Parselmouth. The snake turned slowly, deliberately, and descended on one of the Death Eaters. He screamed, but only briefly. Holly was broken from her trance-like state as she saw the snake reduce the man to a charred, blackened corpse in mere moments. She felt sick as the smell of the faint fear and the burning corpses began to overwhelm her, and what she had just done sunk in. Her wand hand shook, and she clamped her other hand down on it. "Extinguish yourselves!" Holly hissed desperately, and the snakes began to eat their own tails. Normal fire, lit by the snakes, still raged, but the cursed fire was gone in moments. She felt shame rush through her, and she knew she could have ordered the snakes to do that from the start. She'd been so full of rage, enough rage to burn a man to ash and melted skin. One of the Death Eaters finally noticed her and began pointing at her. "Look, it's Potter." "1,000 galleons to anyone who brings him to me," shouted a familiar voice from behind a skull mask. Holly tore her eyes away from the man she'd killed, and put her wand up. This, she realized, had been a really stupid idea. Chapter 41, Year 4, Chapter 7. Chapter text. Foul Miner. Holly shouted, whipping lightning across the massed shields of the Death Eaters. The sound and bright light her curse made slamming into those shields gave her a precious few moments as she darted for cover. She moved not a moment too soon, and the place she'd been standing exploded as a blasting curse struck. Holly fired back, casting as quick as she could, as she ran between the burning tents. The Death Eaters sprinted after her, the Robertses forgotten, and all semblance of order on their part gone. Holly was much faster and more agile than the drunken Death Eaters, many of whom had guts bulging against their old robes. One of the Death Eaters had kept in better shape than the rest, and it was his downfall. He dashed into the burning tents ahead of his friends, and Holly turned back towards him. Her lightning curse cut through his shield, and then her stunner lifted him off his feet and blasted him through a burning tent. Another rounded the corner, and Holly only barely shielded herself against his curse, a crescent blade of purple fire. She tried to disarm him, then tried to stun him when that failed. He laughed and advanced on her. Stunning spells and disarming charms. "I heard you could fight, Potter," he snarled. He raised his wand, ready to cast a powerful dark curse. Holly was faster. She slashed her wand at him and hissed, and a whip of black lightning cut off his wand hand. He screamed, but Holly knocked him out with a stunning spell as a mercy. Holly had to desperately roll out of the way of a wheezing purple curse that she'd seen explosively disembowel a man only a minute ago. It had already cut through several tents and left a trail in the smoke as it raced towards her. She fired back blindly, the fire and smoke obscuring her from the Death Eaters. One of her spells, a reductor curse, must have hit one of them because Holly heard one of them scream loudly. The Death Eaters might have been slower than her, but there were so many of them that they were able to outflank her. She rushed around a corner only to find half a dozen skull mask-wearing dark wizards blocking her path. She shielded against a half-dozen spells and blinded them with a quick Lumus Solemn, then dashed between two burning tents. Spells shot after her, jets of light cutting and blasting through tents. One cutting curse glanced Holly, but it was deflected off by her basilisk skin coat. The impact of the curse still sent her sprawling, but she'd only been bruised instead of cut open. A bolt of green light rushed over her head, and Holly felt a chill run down her spine. That had been a killing curse, and it blew apart a large tent as it missed her. "Potter is the Dark Lord's alone. No killing curses or he'll deal with you personally," shouted a voice Holly recognized, Barty Crouch Jr. Holly sent a powerful blasting curse back in the direction the killing curse had been fired from, and she grinned as she heard a Death Eater cry out in pain. She rounded another corner and was halfway through casting a curse when she realized the men standing at the end of the row were Sirius, Remus, and the Weasleys. "Holly. You stupid, brave girl," Sirius said, rushing towards her. She let him drag her back behind the line of adult wizards. I had to, Sirius," she said, breathing hard. The Death Eater's scream as his own fiend fear engulfed him echoed in her mind. "Listen to me, Holly. We can handle it from here. I need you to go get your friends to safety, you understand me?" Sirius said, putting his hands on her shoulders. I understand, Sirius," Holly said. Her face was stained with soot. "They're just back behind that corner, Holly. They refused to leave without you," Mr. Weasley said, and Holly couldn't help but smile. It was a stupid thing for them to do, but she appreciated it all the same. I will, Mr. Weasley. I promise, Holly said. She heard rushing footsteps get closer. Go. Now. Remus said, as the adults found cover and got ready. Holly dashed around the corner to see her defiant-looking friends, all with their wands out. Holly! Ginny shouted, and Ron grinned. Hermione let out a sigh of relief. Fred and George seemed to relax slightly. You're a bloody nutter, you know that. Ron said. I know. Let's get back to the woods and get out of here, Holly said. The fire had begun to spread by now, but luckily most of the people had run ahead of them. Here and there they had to help people who'd fallen up, but nobody stopped them as they left the campsite and rushed into the woods. Afraid of something, Potter? Draco Malfoy drawled. He was leaning against a tree, looking utterly relaxed. Holly's friends started to speak, but she was still running on adrenaline and not inclined to be very charitable. Stupefy. Holly responded, sending Draco sprawling to the ground with a look of utter shock on his face. Holly turned to see her friends giving her a look. What? She asked. That was, rapid, Hermione said. I'm fairly certain I heard Malfoy Sr. out there. I don't want Draco blabbing to his dad, Holly said. Makes sense, Fred said, and he hexed Draco. Pimples broke out across his face, and everyone but Hermione laughed. Really, Fred, she said. I'll admit it's a low blow, but Malfoy's a little one and Death Eater, Fred said. Holly was about to interject when a deafening roar split the night sky. Wizards on very fast broomsticks flew overhead, just above the treetops, and started firing powerful curses down into the opposite edge of the campgrounds. And that'd be the hit wizards, bloody late as usual, Ron said. A few darts of light were cast up at the Ministry wizards on broomsticks, but they were moving so fast that they were nearly impossible to hit. Some of them cast a spell that sent pulses of blue light into the dark clouds above them, and a moment later it began to rain. It was light, for a moment, and then the rain came down in earnest. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the rain seemed to become almost horizontal. Is this far enough? Hermione shouted over the wind. Let's go back a bit. Holly responded, and they went deeper into the woods. The sounds of fighting were more distant now. Dull thumps of blasting curses, sharp cracks from bolts of lightning, the high-pitched noise of stunning spells being fired en masse. They quickly found shelter from the storm beneath a large tree, which provided a little bit of dry ground. Do you think we're winning? Ron asked. Have you counted how many hit wizards and Aurors have flown past overhead in the last few minutes? Ginny asked, rolling her eyes. As half a dozen bolts of lightning all slammed down from the storm clouds above, right onto the battlefield, Holly felt something change. A sensation she hadn't noticed faded, and suddenly Holly felt much lighter. A subtle pressure at her temples that had been building and building faded, and instinctively Holly knew what had happened. They've dismissed the anti-apparition jinx, Holly said, her voice cutting through the noise of the wind. It's all over, then, George said. Poor Mr. Roberts, Hermione said, and Holly could see how she relaxed as she too felt the jinx fade. Everyone still had their wands in their hands, though, and as several figures ran towards them out of the smoke, rain and darkness, everyone pointed their wands at them. Whoa, we're with the Ministry, one of them said, a handsome dark-skinned man in the characteristic coat of an Auror. Several hit wizards and hit witches trailed after him. Kingsley Shacklebolt, Auror. Are you all right, Miss Potter? He asked. I'll have one hell of a bruise in the morning, but I'm essentially fine, Holly said. That was a lie, of course. She could still hear the Death Eater's screams, still see the moment his skin started to melt over and over again in her mind. As her adrenaline faded, the memory became clearer and clearer. That was a hell of a thing you did, kid. Charging in like that, reckless, but you probably saved a whole lot of lives, Kingsley said. Holly felt awkward, tried to think of what to say, and just nodded instead. Is everyone all right? Ginny asked. Kingsley turned to look at her and clearly recognized the Weasleys. Your father and brothers are fine, miss. Black and Lupin were too, Miss Potter. We've got a few injured, but nothing St. Mungo's can't fix. A few people died before we got there, but the Robertses are all right, Kingsley said, and Holly felt relieved. At least she'd managed to help them after all. Kingsley led them back to the campground, and Holly saw with some surprise that their tents were still there and intact. Mr. Weasley, Sirius, and Remus were all apparently still busy, so Bill was in charge. Nobody felt much like doing anything but sleeping, and Holly didn't even take off her coat before she got into bed. As Hermione blew out the candles, leaving the girls' tent in darkness, Holly traced her hands along where she thought the spell had hit her coat. There was no mark, no marred surface that she could feel. Now she knew that it wouldn't do much for the force behind a spell, but knowing her coat would hold up to a dark cutting curse was comforting. When everyone else in the tent was comfortably asleep, Holly cried. Softly and quietly, curled up in her top bunk, she sobbed into her pillow. The memories of the night's events played in her mind again and again, like she'd been tied down in front of a television playing the same tape on repeat. No matter how she tried to put it out of her mind, it always returned. The whispers were getting stronger. She could hear them in the quiet of the dead of night, despite her occlumency. Her hazily remembered dream about playing Quidditch for England and impressing the inexplicable Veela mascot seemed like a distant memory, but she'd had it only a few hours ago. Eventually, she had no more tears to cry that night and she drifted off to an uneasy sleep. She had vivid nightmares, cacophonies of death and bloodshed that seemed to have no internal logic. She woke the next morning still feeling tired, and her side really did have a huge bruise. Sirius and Remus still weren't back, so Holly walked back to the portkey with the Weasleys. It had only been a few hours since they'd gone to sleep, and so everyone was too tired to talk as they trekked back all the way across the moor to the portkey station. Holly saw that there were several uniformed hit wizards standing guard around it, and how quickly Mr. Weasley was able to get an express portkey to Stoatsheed Hill. Oh, thank goodness. You're all safe. Mrs. Weasley shouted as they approached the burrow once more. She hugged everyone, even Holly and Hermione, fiercely. Breakfast at the burrow wasn't quite able to dispel Holly's sadness, but she felt better after it. Even if she did read the morning edition of the Daily Prophet. 4 innocent people, and 1 Death Eater, had died last night. 2 had been killed in the stampede away from the campgrounds, and 2 by the Death Eaters. Only 1 Death Eater had died at the scene, but the paper promised that several had been badly wounded. Holly knew that for a fact. There was a glossy picture taken at some point during her running battle with the Death Eaters right there on the front page, with an entire 2 paragraphs dedicated to Holly's heroism. Her toast didn't seem so appetizing after that. She certainly didn't feel like an all-conquering hero, she thought. Chapter 42, Year 4, Chapter 8. Chapter Text. Holly sat against an old stone amidst the long grass. A mug of tea, long since gone cold, was her only companion as the morning sun came clear into the sky. It was cold, but she didn't really mind. Her wand felt warm in her hand as turned it this way and that, a warmth that usually brought her comfort. Her hand usually stopped shaking when she felt it. She looked up at the sky, which was a perversely clear and brilliant blue, and remembered. She remembered Quirrell burning under her grip, Riddle's final scream of terror, and what the Death Eater had looked like when he'd died. When Holly had killed him. Did he have a wife or a kid, she wondered. Were they happy to be free of a monster, or were they crying for a loving father? Did it matter to her? He'd been happy enough to kill and torment innocent people, to torture someone just because they were different to him. She thought back to something Dumbledore had once told her, and she understood. She'd been so young then, so sure, and yet it had only been a year and a half since that day in the hospital wing. So many things had changed, for the better and for the worse. You okay, Holly? Ginny said, emerging from the long grass. Her hair was wet, and Holly smiled weakly as she approached. Not really, Holly said, looking down. Here, away from everyone else, she felt she could be a little more honest. Ginny sat down next to her so that the two of them were both leaning against the rock. Is it about last night, or? Ginny asked, and neither of them looked at one another. They both stared up into the vast blue sky, watching the occasional white cloud roll by. The one who died. I killed him. I turned his curse back on him, Holly whispered. She hadn't told anyone about that yet, and surely the Aurors wouldn't work it out if she didn't tell them. A dark wizard dying after his fiend fear broke loose. A tale as old as time. Did the fire whisper to you too? Ginny asked, her voice just as low. Why yeah. I was so angry. He tried to set it on Dean Thomas and his sister Holly said, and the words felt weak. She'd stopped the Fiendfyre well before she'd ordered it to turn on its master. So you turned it back on him, Ginny said. Her shoulder touched Holly's, a burst of warmth on a cold morning. I stopped it. Then I listened to them and turned it on him, Holly said, and that difference was important. Important to her, at least. I can still hear Tom, sometimes. When it's quiet, and I forgot to be doing something, Ginny said, as she picked up a twig and twirled it through her fingers. Sometimes he's nice, like he was at first. Sometimes it feels like I'm back down there. I don't want to end up like him, Holly said. Well, that's a silly thing to worry about. You and I both know he'd never have come down into the chamber to save me. Or gone charging off like a lunatic to save little Emily Roberts, Ginny said, as she put her hand on Holly's. What if I change? Holly said. Everyone changes. You weren't always Holly, but you're still you. Just better looking, and you've never been like Tom, Ginny said. She held Holly's hand now, tenderly, slowly. A faint wind blew through the long grass, revealing the burrow for just a moment. They weren't really that far away from it, but here behind the long grass felt like an entirely different world to Holly. Thanks, Ginny, Holly said. Her hand wasn't shaking in Ginny's, and she didn't feel quite so tired. She leant her head against Ginny's shoulder, taking advantage of Ginny's recent gain in height. Anytime, Holly. You know you can speak to us about this stuff, me, Hermione, even Ron. And you know my mum or Sirius would listen, Ginny said. I know, Holly said, and the two of them sat there for quite a while, watching the sky. It wasn't quite that simple, of course, but Holly's return to Grimmauld Place was not as melancholy as it would have been without that conversation behind the long grass. Sirius looked worn out but otherwise fine when he arrived at the burrow that day to pick Holly up. They walked through the fire into the long dining room of Grimmauld Place, and as soon as the bright green fire vanished, Holly gave Sirius a tight hug. It's good to see you too, Holly. I'm sorry the World Cup turned out, well, like that, Sirius said as he hugged her back. The cup was fun, Holly said, letting Sirius go. It had been everything she'd been looking forward to and more. It was the night after that would live in her nightmares. Are the Robertses all right? Holly asked. They will be. You got the Death Eater's attention pretty quickly, all things considered, Sirius said. I need to tell you a few things about the attack. I recognized some of the voices. Who did you recognize? It won't hold up in court, but Dumbledore will be glad to get some good intelligence, Sirius said. Malfoy was the one who saw me. Offered up 1,000 galleons to whoever caught me, Holly said. Cheapskate. He could have at least sprung for 10,000, though maybe we should be glad he didn't. Anyone else? Yeah. One of them missed me with a killing curse, and I'm sure I heard Barty Crouch Jr. tell him off. You're sure you heard Crouch? Sirius asked, looking straight at her. I'm sure. I'd recognize that voice anywhere, Hole said with a shiver. Shit. Crouch being involved makes it being just a riot that got out of hand really fucking unlikely, Sirius said, and then looked a little awkward. Come on, Sirius. I hear worse from ickle firsties every week at school, Holly said. Remus keeps bugging me to be a better role model for you. Just so long as you don't go swearing like a sailor in front of him, or let him catch you with that fire whiskey you have hidden away on your breath, Sirius said with a grin. How do you know about that? Holly asked. Well, Padfoot happens to have a very good nose, and so do I, Sirius said, and then they both laughed. The Auror who'd found her after the attack, Kingsley Shacklebolt, came round that afternoon to ask Holly and Sirius for statements. Holly mostly told the truth, but she didn't mention recognizing the voices on Sirius's advice. When it came time to describe the Fiendfyre, Holly left out the fact that she had ordered it to attack the Death Eater and let Kingsley come to his own conclusions. The rest of Holly's holidays passed much as they had before the World Cup, though Sirius and Remus waited a few days to let her recover before they started up the lessons again. Holly's occlumency got better and better, and she started to delve into a few of the more advanced methods. She made a note to peruse the restricted section at Hogwarts for anything on legilimency. Holly had her friends round to Grimmauld Place several times, and she and Hermione took Ron and Ginny out into Muggle London once or twice. Ron, now something of an old Muggle hand, was able to fit in almost as well as Holly and Hermione. The Weasleys, the Grangers, and Holly, Sirius, and Remus all met up in Diagon Alley to do their Hogwarts shopping. Something new was on the uniform list this year, dress robes, and all the adults would only smile knowingly when Holly or her friends asked them what would be going on at Hogwarts this year. Sirius managed to save Ron from a pair of horrifying lace-encrusted dress robes by remembering a set he'd left at Grimmauld Place as a Hogwarts student. Ginny managed to find a decent pair for cheap in a second-hand shop, and everyone inundated Holly with advice on what she should get. Luckily, she listened to none of them and got Madame Mackin's opinion. She ended up with a set of green dress robes she really liked, and that made her feel good about how she looked. Hermione managed to get hers whilst no one was looking, so all Holly got to see of it was a flash of periwinkle fabric. It rained the morning that Holly was due at King's Cross Station to return to Hogwarts. As they got out of the Muggle taxi at the station, both of her guardians turned to her. "Stay safe this year," Holly Sirius said. "I'll try," Holly replied, grinning. "Well, don't go looking for trouble. I'm sure you'll find more than enough to give both of us grey hairs before our time, but try your best," Remus said, as he put a hand on Holly's shoulder. "And try to prank Snivellus for me at least once," Sirius said. Remus sighed. "Do write to us when you get the Quidditch fixture," Holly Remus said, as they walked through the barrier. "I will. Don't go and get all old and boring on me while I'm gone," Holly said. "I promise not to." "Marauders Honor," Sirius said, laughing. Holly waved goodbye, and then she got aboard the train. Ron, Ginny, and Hermione were already there, and Holly gratefully sat down next to Ginny. "Hello, Holly. Did Sirius tell you what's going on this year?" "All any of our lot would do is give out weird hints," Ron said. "Turns out he can keep a secret pretty well," Holly said. "Funny that. Your mother did say we'd find out this evening, though," Hermione said. "Oh yeah, she did say that. I guess it can't be too bad if it requires dress robes, though, I mean, it's not like we're gonna be fighting dragons in them." "Exploding snap, anyone?" Ginny said. Neville Longbottom soon joined them, and halfway through the game so did someone else. "So what did your father sell to get seats in the top box, Weasel?" Draco Malfoy said, leaning against the opposite wall and looking into the compartment through the door Neville had left open. He had large bags under his eyes, like he hadn't been sleeping properly. His two cronies, Crabbe and Goyle, both seemed to have gained about a foot of height and 50 pounds of muscle over the summer holidays. They stood behind Draco in an attempt at menace. "What did your father have to sell to stay out of Azkaban?" snapped Hermione. "I wasn't talking to you," Mudblood Draco spat. "Sure you want to do this song and dance again, Draco?" "We both know I'd wipe the floor with you," Holly said, idly spinning her wand in her fingers. "We'll see if you're still so confident after I win our year's bracket," Draco said, and Holly blinked. "Our year's bracket in what? You mean you don't know about it?" Draco said, sounding genuinely confused. "All those raids and no one told your father?" "That's rich, Weasel," Draco said, laughing. He didn't stick around too long, however. Perhaps, Holly thought, he remembered being stunned and then hexed at the World Cup. "Does everybody know about this mysterious event but us?" Holly asked. "Seems like it," Ron said, and then they went back to their exploding snap game. The rain was pouring down when the train arrived at Hogsmeade Station, and Holly barely had time to shout hello to Hagrid as she ran past him to the carriages. Holly, Hermione, Ginny, Neville, and Ron all piled into one carriage. It was a tight fit, but they were all able to sit down if only just. As the Thestral started to slowly trot towards the gates and the rain beat down on the carriage roof, Holly caught sight of the castle for the first time in months. She smiled, happy to be back for another year at Hogwarts. Chapter 43, Year 4, Chapter 9. Chapter Text. Lightning flashed across the sky, striking just outside the grounds of the castle. The rain poured down in thick sheets, and Holly was glad she'd charmed her cloak imperturbable. Still, her hood up, she ran up the stone steps to the entrance hall with Ron, Ginny, Neville, and Hermione. The wind howled around them, so loud that the only thing Holly could hear over it was the occasional crack of distant thunder. A water balloon exploded against her cloak, and Holly saw Peeves swooping low over them. Everyone ran faster, and Neville nearly slipped, but they managed to get inside and away from Peeves just as McGonagall stormed out and sent the poltergeist packing. "That thing is a bloody menace." "Poor Neville nearly tripped and broke his neck," Ron said. "According to Hogwarts, a history, several headmasters have tried to get rid of him." "Poltergeists are powerful magical creatures," Hermione explained. "Still, I reckon Dumbledore could get rid of him if he really wanted to," Holly said, as the five of them entered the Great Hall and took their seats at the Gryffindor table. The enchanted ceiling above, which showed the sky outside, flashed with thunder and rained illusory water. Each of the 4 house tables was lined with empty plates and platters. Holly only half listened to the Sorting Hat's song, and her claps for the new Gryffindors were distracted at best. She was too eager trying to figure out what was going on this year. Every adult in her life seemed to know and delight in not telling her. She was distracted only temporarily by the magnificent feast. "Did you know the Wizengamot tried to pass a bill forcing Hogwarts not to make contracts with elves?" Hermione said. "What do you mean?" Holly asked. "They wanted them to be kept like Dobby was." "It's barbaric," Hermione said. She was going to say more, but then the feast appeared. The empty platters were full of roasted meats and vegetables, with freshly baked bread at regular intervals. "You gotta be a right tosser not to be willing to pay for this," Ron said. "Say, do you guys see the new defense professor up there?" Ginny asked. Nobody knew. "Maybe Dumbledore couldn't get anyone," Holly said. "Maybe Lupin'll come back," Ron said. "Ron, Holly lives with him. I'm sure he'd tell her if he was coming back," Hermione said. "Maybe the new professor's just late," Holly said, to a general round of laughter. Holly enjoyed the feast and helped herself to seconds of the treacle tarts during dessert. The food at Hogwarts was always excellent, though the feasts took it up another level. As she helped herself to seconds of the treacle tart, Holly saw someone glaring at her from the Slytherin table. He was a tall, muscular 7th-year boy with dark hair and darker eyes. "Do you know who that is?" Holly asked, nodding towards the glaring boy. "Thomas Avery, I think." "What'd you do to him?" Ron asked. "I don't know, but he really seems to be angry with me," Holly said. She'd never so much as spoken a word to him. Hermione opened her mouth to speak, but she fell silent along with everyone else in the Great Hall when Dumbledore rose to speak. "Now that we are all fed and watered, I think there are several notices to cover before we can all head off to bed," Dumbledore said, smiling out at the crowd of students. There was a sense of anticipation and excitement building, as rumors of the mysterious event happening at Hogwarts this year had circulated throughout the hall at the feast. As is now a long-standing tradition, Mr. Filch has updated his list of banned items to include such terrors as fanged frisbees and ever-bashing boomerangs. The full list of prohibited items, now standing at 137 items long, is available outside his office. Whilst most of you are well aware of this, for those new to our school and those that need reminding, the forest on the grounds is off limits to students, Dumbledore said, working his way through the usual announcements. Whispers shot around the Great Hall, everyone eager to get to the real announcements. "I do have one more," Dumbledore began, but he was interrupted by lightning crashing down from the enchanted ceiling itself. It was only light and sound, but it was immensely loud and bright. As everyone blinked rapidly, Holly saw someone enter the Great Hall. People turned, one by one at first and then a huge wave all at once. A man in a muddy coat stood in the doorway, his wooden leg and artificial eye glaringly obvious. His skin seemed to be more scar than flesh, and he leant on a long walking stick. He was absolutely soaked through, and already a small puddle of water surrounded him. He walked forward, his 2 different footfalls falling into an awkward, discordant rhythm. Everyone stared, and Holly recognized him for her last year at Hogwarts. "He's an Auror," she whispered to her friends. Eyebrows shot up, but nobody dared do anything more than whisper to one another. Dumbledore was in the middle of speaking, after all. "Good to see you, Alastor. This is, as you may have surmised, our new defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Alistair Moody," Dumbledore said and started to clap, but everyone was too transfixed by Moody's bizarre appearance to do anything but stare. Moody gave Dumbledore what, in his mind, was a friendly nod and then took his seat. Dumbledore looked at him once, nodded in understanding, and kept talking. "That, I believe, brings us near to the end of these somewhat overlong remarks, and you all that much closer to your warm, comfortable beds. But, stay a moment if you would. Because when you dream in those warm, comfortable beds tonight, you will be dreaming of what I am about to announce. This year, Hogwarts will play host to an event not seen in centuries. It will play host to the Triwizard Tournament. Dumbledore said, and the Great Hall erupted in noise. Several people cheered. One Slytherin even got up and clapped. Triwizard Tournament? Holly asked, confused. Now, some of you, indeed probably most of you, will not know what the Triwizard Tournament is. It was, after all, discontinued several hundred years ago on account of the rising death toll. The three finest schools of magic in all of Europe, our own Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang, each select a champion to represent them in 3 magical tasks. Whilst that is still the case in this new tournament, all involved in arranging it felt that it was rather focused on one individual only, and, of course, we took steps to ensure no champion faced lethal danger, Dumbledore said. Holly was entranced by the idea and was grinning with the rest of her housemates. The first change is that no students under the age of 17 will be eligible to become a champion, Dumbledore said, only for indignant shouts to interrupt him. As they are not yet ready to face the dangers of the tournament. However, to allow the schools as a whole to contribute, a number of competitions and challenges will be run throughout the school year, open to students of all ages from each school. Victory in these events will bring aid to the champion of the victor's school during the main tasks, so those of you not yet of age may still contribute to Hogwarts' chances. These events will be announced throughout the year, but I have the distinct pleasure of announcing the first of these tonight. This year, the internal Quidditch leagues of Hogwarts, Beauxbatons, and Durmstrang will be combined, giving us a league of 13 teams, Dumbledore said, and that got people really excited. Holly grinned broadly at the idea. It sounded like a great time, and everyone always said that Hogwarts should play more Quidditch matches a season. I see you are all appropriately excited. Our guests from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang will arrive in October, and champions will be selected by an impartial judge on the night of Halloween. If selected, you will face great dangers, but will also be given the chance to vie for eternal glory. And, as one cannot eat eternal glory, a prize of 10,000 galleons. Now, off to be bed with you. Dumbledore said, and Holly talked with her friends the whole way up to Gryffindor Tower. Are you going to try and enter? Hermione asked her as they were queuing up to brush their teeth just outside the girls' bathrooms. I'm not that, well, I am that reckless, but only if someone else is in danger. I already have a mountain of gold and all the eternal glory anybody could want, Holly said, and Hermione nodded slowly. Just making sure, she said. Holly rolled her eyes. Holly didn't dream of eternal glory that night, but she did sleep soundly. Her nightmares had been banished for the moment, and she woke on her first day back bright and full of energy. This tournament thing sounds mental. I mean, I'd enter if I could, but still, Ron said that morning at breakfast. I'm glad they limited participation to of-age wizards only, at least. And the other events sound like they might be less lethal, Hermione said. I dunno, Hermione. I've heard they play some rough Quidditch at Durmstrang, Ginny said, putting some scrambled eggs onto her plate. Speaking of, mate, do you know when Angelina's holding tryouts? Ron asked Holly. I think Friday afternoon. You're a shoo-in for keeper, Ron, though. The only other choice is Cormac McFucking-Lagan, Holly said. Blimey, what'd he do? Ron asked. Implied that Holly, well, implied some nasty things about her. Made a complaint to McGonagall and everything, Hermione said. Right. I'll have a word with the twins to hit him extra hard during tryouts, Ron said, and Holly laughed. Miss Potter. Professor Dumbledore would like a word in his office after dinner tonight, McGonagall told Holly as she handed out timetables. Gotcha, Professor, Holly said. Draco Malfoy received his usual shipment of sweets from home that morning, but Holly noticed that he didn't seem to be too happy about the letter attached to the parcel. He was irritable and withdrawn all day, a change Holly mostly welcomed, as he'd stopped trying to mess with her, but it was very odd. He hadn't said a single rude or bigoted thing when they were collecting pus in herbology or learning about blast-ended roots in care of magical creatures. He wasn't even rude to Hagrid. There was something odd going on with Malfoy, Holly decided. Disappointingly, Holly didn't have defense until Thursday, but the school was already awash with rumors about how Moody was a great, if very unnerving, teacher. Several older students had walked out of his classes looking like they'd been hexed half a dozen times, and most of them probably had been. People were already shouting constant vigilance at one another in the halls. That night, after dinner, Holly gave the gargoyle the password and headed up to see Dumbledore. She was unsure what she'd be learning from him. Advanced spells, maybe, or perhaps some kind of hidden esoteric magic. There was only one way to find out, she realized, and opened the door to Dumbledore's office. Chapter 44, Year 4, Chapter 10. Chapter text. Enjoying being back, Holly. Dumbledore